Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It's Thursday, May 2nd, 2019. I'm Michael Brooks on a Michael Thursday, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We're broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On today's program, Ben Burgis. He teaches logic and philosophy at Rutgers University, and he's author of Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left. We take leave of our feelings, because we're always in our feelings as leftists. We're always in our bags, to talk about facts and logic in the cause of socialism with the great Ben Burgis' excellent new book, which you can pre-order from Zero Books. The U.S. military is on the balls of its feet footing with regards to Venezuela. This is extremely disturbing. Juan Guaido is saying he needs more military pressure to effectively mount a coup in Venezuela. Donald Trump and other administration officials continue to make threats against the Venezuelan government. William Barr is not going to go speak to the House Judiciary Committee after Kamala Harris washes him in the Senate Judiciary Committee hearings. Moderate Democrats fret about their vote for Bill Barr because apparently it's just too naked for them.
They should be fretting about a lot more than that.
Yeah, I would say if you're Joe Manchin, you should be fretting about basically the entirety of your public career as well as your daughter's private career. Look up that career. Emails show that the Trump administration had no way of linking separated, kidnapped children from their, relinking them with their parents after they had been kidnapped, and that there are dozens that have still not been reunited after the terrorist policy of kidnappings. A 16-year-old boy, migrant, has died in U.S. government custody in Texas, and a Newton judge is to return to court on May 30th on charges of helping immigrants elude an ICE officer. So facing criminal consequences for doing the right and basic human thing. The Trump administration is bringing McKinsey on to check out the student loan system. And we can already tell you what the one, I would assume many, but the one certainty of a continued policy if Pete Buttigieg is elected president. Christian Gillibrand has a plan to give every voter $600 to donate to campaigns in a yawn fest. Sorry. Beto, I would focus more on getting them health care versus getting them currency to give campaigns.
I want
Here's money.
bucks.
Yeah. Here's gift cards you can exclusively spend on our campaigns.
Right. How about a gift card you could exclusively spend on, I don't know, your house or your health care? Beto O'Rourke says he won't take fossil fuel money, but he already has. There is a second, boring as all anything Colorado Democrat who's running for president. I refuse to even say his name. Hickenlooper at least had an entertainment value. You can look it up. Jeffrey Sachs says that U.S. sanctions have devastated Venezuela. Lula de Silva says Brazil is run by lunatics. And that and much more on today's Majority Report. We're all here, sans Sam. How's everybody doing?
Well,
Matt as well. Jamie, how are you?
I'm all right today. Pretty good.
Brendan?
I'm feeling more powerful as the white centrist hydra of 2020 Democratic candidates grows.
I understand that, like, I get Sam's perspective, and I think it's right that, like, if everybody's running, it's less humiliating to lose. But I have to start thinking that, like, when Seth Moulton starts in that, like, I don't know. Like,
Eric
does
Swalwell.
Eric Swalwell, like, doesn't it just at a certain point become like,
Tim Ryan.
this is kind of embarrassing.
Like the 21st person to hop on should feel a little bit embarrassed.
It's like, guys, sorry. Like, Joe Biden, like, sorry. He's got that lane, guys.
It's so redundant.
And he's definitely a better politician.
Well, I think the other thing I'm keeping an eye on is the Democrats that are running for president when they should just run for Senate in their home state. There's a guy, Steve Bullock in Montana, who's looking like he's going to run for president. Beto O'Rourke, of course.
Beto O'Rourke Prime should run for Senate.
Yeah, like, I'm tired of, like, and it's like that class of Democrat that's telling us we need to be very serious about the Senate, guys.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, glass houses. Oh, why would I take a Senate seat back from a Republican when I could run for president and lose miserably?
I want to do one honorable exception of these candidates, and I do think Jay Inslee, the governor of Washington, who is polling at, I saw a poll from New Hampshire where he was one. I think there was maybe one other person, maybe like Julian Castro or some other, someone like that who deserves no respect, who literally no person said they were voting for. Like, his zero was like 0.0. But Jay Inslee is the governor of Washington, and his campaign is totally climate centric. So I want to give like honorable mention to Jay Inslee so far of these. Like, he's the only one that I can see where it's like, oh, there's an actual justifiable, distinct lane. But we can add like the Bennett, Hickenlooper, Ryan, and
Those
I refuse.
are all the same guy. Like,
they're literally
it's so redundant.
Yes,
Yeah, they're Hydra.
They're the same.
Like,
They're
I
a Hydra.
refuse to learn the difference between these people because there is not one.
Yeah, I was going to say, what would you learn?
Their names, I guess.
Seth Moulton, I guess, has like a all right Mass accent, but I've never even heard him talk, so I'm just assuming that. And Swalwell's, very like energetic. Swalwell's like way less cool than those Krasenstein brothers. And he reminds me of them, but I have a lot more respect for the Krasensteins.
The Krasensteins would poll better than he would.
No doubt. All right. Speaking of people whose contribution to we just talked about negligible contributions to public life. Let's go to someone whose overall impact in public life might be unintentionally positive, because by how absolutely, stunningly, relentlessly horrible she is, she's both good for us in terms of the analytics and numbers, and is a literal walking, living, breathing case study against all forms of inherited dynastic power. Of course, I'm talking about Meghan McCain and Bernie Sanders, as he continues to do. Look, we know that he's the leader on inequality, on healthcare, on justice, when no one else was talking about these issues, when actually people were fighting for the other side of these issues, like Joe Biden. But now we're going to have to acknowledge that he's a leader on foreign policy. The Yemen resolution is actually historically groundbreaking. The Trump administration continues to support a genocidal campaign there. His leadership's been massive in that regard. And I would actually say asserting the right of universal suffrage is a radical, absolutely necessary, politically extremely risky, and cynics and cornballs like Cory Booker will take shots at him for it, but it's a brave, brilliant stance that every single person in this country, even if they are in prison, should have a right to vote. So props as always to Bernie Sanders, and Meghan McCain is not happy.
No, he should not get out.
But I think he should be given the death penalty. I mean, that's where I'm at with this. People who commit acts of terror on American soil.
Does this include, in your mind, domestic terrorists also?
Yes, terrorism is terror. Yes, of course.
And what about those guys who shoot schools up? That also,
they should, of course, be
child
in jail.
molesters. Child molesters.
It is. I'm trying to tell you this. What Bernie Sanders said is going to be turned into a clip that will be. It upset me this morning.
How do you feel about the fact that people in Vermont are allowed to vote?
Abby and I didn't have brothers that served multiple times, and I didn't watch my brother deploy when he was 19 to fight this crap. To have them come here and give the right to vote.
Can we all do an eye roll contest? This is mine. That's just like an assault of just like, there's something about, there's very, weirdly, she reminds me of Thomas Friedman in a sense that it's both just like this aggressive stupidity. Like, it's It's not just that I'm really, really, really stupid. It's that I'm like like that's what a Thomas Friedman column is like. It's just like, oh my God, I have a bad take and a bad take and a bad take and boom, boom, boom.
It's like Thomas Friedman goes to the mall.
And did you see that? It's exactly, except he did. The real one did too. And did you notice how, I always forget her name, the good person that's
Sunny?
next to me. Yeah, Sunny. You notice how Sunny's trying to point out that like this happens in Vermont, like the policy dimensions of it, and she's just like, my brother. She's like bulldozing over like the actual point of the conversation. So I guess you got to give her some props to mention her brother instead of her dad.
Yeah, it's good to mix it up a little sometimes.
Yeah, mix it up.
She should just keep talking always. I think she's socialism's best advertisement.
I could not agree more.
She definitely makes our jobs easier.
Yeah, she makes our jobs easier. And I think at the end of the day, if you want to know why we need a Sanders presidency and some fundamental structural change, just watch a couple of clips of Meghan McCain. Because no decent society would allow that to exist. I mean, in a good society with tax inherited wealth, maybe Meghan McCain might have had to like, I don't know, work some like actual regular jobs and like learn to be like a decent human being.
And the way she says, this is going to get clipped. Guess what, Meghan? As somebody who clips these sorts of things for propaganda purposes, be my guest.
Yes.
Go ahead and clip it.
Yeah. Go ahead, clip away. You know what else is going to get clipped? You. That's what also is getting clipped on a daily basis while you say these relentlessly nonsense takes.
Maoist Bernie.
Protect your loved ones with the peace of mind of life insurance. You think you can't afford it? Chances are SelectQuote can help you get it for less than $1 a day. SelectQuote comparison shops up to 10 highly rated companies, including Prudential, Banner Life, Mutual of Omaha, and others to find you a company with the best rates. For example, SelectQuote could find a 35-year-old man a $500,000 policy for under $19 a month. That's less than $1 a day. A cup of coffee a day costs more than that. SelectQuote's breakthrough terminology allows them to quickly match you with the best insurance company to match your policy. Plus, quotes are free. SelectQuote could save you time and money. Get your free quote at SelectQuote.com/majority. That's SelectQuote.com/majority for your free quote. Don't put off protecting your family another day. SelectQuote.com/majority. Get full details on the example policy at SelectQuote.com/commercials. Your premium could vary depending on your health, issuing company, and other factors not available in all states. How did we find Brendan for this job? How did we discover Brendan?
Crystal ball.
Was it, Crystal, you work with Crystal Ball?
Yeah.
No, I didn't know that.
I thought that he was left on Sam's doorstep by a
He was
mysterious
like
witch.
He was like a little Irish president. He's just like, I could do a video clipping, sir.
Sam's like, hello?
Wait, so if I give you 2 potatoes a day and milk, you'll clip the videos that Michael and Matt won't do because they don't work hard enough. Jon Stewart jumping into a cab, rushing the scene. I was abandoned by my previous patron. I'll watch 10 hours of cable a day, sir, if you could just give me upkeep. It's actually a great character.
He lives under Sam's stairs.
The Dickensian Majority Report.
Dickensian Majority Report. It's just like, Mr. Seder was a good master, and I'm going to let take one. However, he gave me roles when... that's a better use of the Jordan Peterson voice. No, of course, in reality, Brendan was discovered by ZipRecruiter. We all know that finding the right people is incredibly hard, and then managing the volume of applications. I'm starting to experience this myself, as well. And it's very hard to keep track of the specific skill sets you need, but also obviously things like culture fit. But there's a place you can go where hiring is simple, fast, and smart. A place where growing businesses connect to qualified candidates, and that place is ZipRecruiter. ZipRecruiter.com/majority. ZipRecruiter sends your job to over 100 of the web's leading job boards, but they don't stop there. With their powerful matching technology, ZipRecruiter scans thousands of resumes to find the right people with the right experience and invites them to apply to your job. As applications come in, ZipRecruiter analyzes each one and spotlights the top candidates so you never miss a great match. ZipRecruiter is so effective that 4 out of 5 employees who post on ZipRecruiter get quality candidates through the site within the first day. And right now, our listeners can try ZipRecruiter for free at this exclusive web address, ZipRecruiter.com/majority. That's ZipRecruiter.com. That's ZipRecruiter.com/majority. MAJORITY. ZipRecruiter.com/majority. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. And we also got to talk to you about DoorDash. Long day at work, tough day at school, still stuck at the office. Treat yourself to a meal you deserve on demand from your favorite restaurant with DoorDash. DoorDash connects you to all your favorite restaurants in your city. Just use the DoorDash app to choose what you want to eat, and your Dasher will bring it right to you wherever you are. With over 310,000 amazing restaurants, that's a huge amount, and over 3,300 cities across the U.S. and Canada, DoorDash lets you order from your local go-tos as well as favorite chains like Chipotle's, Wendy's, Chick-fil-A, and Cheesecake Factory. Let dinner come to you with DoorDash. Right now, our listeners can get $5 off of their first order of 15 or more when you download the DoorDash app and enter promo code Majority Report. That's $5 off of your first order when you download the DoorDash app from the App Store and enter promo code Majority Report. Again, that's promo code Majority Report for $5 off of your first order from DoorDash. We're going to take a brief break, and we're going to come back with Ben Burgis, author of Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left. Welcome back to the Majority Report. Joining us now is Ben Burgis. He's author of Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left, available for pre-order. It's published by Zero Books. He also teaches philosophy and logic at Rutgers University. He can be seen regularly on the Zero Books channel, YouTube channel, doing logical deconstruction of right-wing arguments. You can also hear him on many different podcasts, including in a weekly segment on TMBS called The Debunk, which you can find on that YouTube channel as well. Ben, thanks so much for doing this. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well. Make sure that when I talk, there isn't a little bit of an echo. I think it should be fine, though, but just make sure. So, Ben, Let's start by setting the parameters of this book. I guess, if you're like me and I think us generally here, I guess as much as I hate to admit it, we probably do use logic and facts in our argumentation. But we also have been so put off.
Brave of you to admit that.
Yeah, it doesn't feel good to admit, but I guess it's true. But there's also the fact that these words, and probably a lot of words that are actually, signify pretty good things, like, I don't know, or phrases like freedom of speech, or
sure,
God forbid, even like open exchange of ideas. These are actually very defensible concepts in not just a liberal sense, in a socialist sense, in a very broad. I mean, if you read Amartya Sen, he wrote a great book called The Argumentative Indian. I mean, these are tools that you could find literally in any culture on earth for, basically human communication and sort of figuring things out. They have been totally toxified by the sort of modern internet right wing, obviously most famously figures around the IDW and, propaganda figures like Ben Shapiro. How did these words become toxified in popular discourse, and what do you mean when you use, not only when you use this, but when you actually teach it? I mean, you teach it professionally.
Yeah, so I think one of the big villains there, long before the IDW, was Ayn Rand, who made a really big deal about logic all the time, although, for example, in her book, Atlas Shrugged, the sections of the book are named after these basic logical principles, like the law of non-contradiction, and there's always this vague implication that if you understood enough about logic, or you cared enough about logic, you would agree with Ayn Rand about capitalism and why socialism is bad and why altruism is bad and all those things, even though there's really no connection whatsoever, which is also something that carries forward to the guys you're talking about, like IDW figures like Ben Shapiro, who makes a big deal about logic. The New York Times famously called him the destroyer of weak arguments. And
which, by the way, how did that make through a copy edit? Sorry, tangent. Go ahead. The destroyer of weak arguments. That would definitely have gotten a red circle in an undergraduate paper.
It would, and one of the things that somebody like me would write in the margins is, if you're going to make this claim, I'd really like to see some examples.
Right.
And there aren't a lot, right? So, for example, in that article, just go on that tangent for a second, the only example that you actually get in that article, it's called The Cool Kids Philosopher, about Ben Shapiro, of him destroying a weak argument, is he's at a Q&A on a college campus, and this 22-year-old girl is challenging him in the Q&A about his position on trans rights. And he says, "Hey, how old are you?" And she says, "Oh, I'm 22." And he says, "Oh, could you just identify as being 60? And she's flustered for a second, and then he kind of bulldozes over her and talks over her and makes his point. And so if this is what you do, right, you're the destroyer of weak arguments, and the standout example is that you momentarily flustered a 22-year-old so she wasn't quite sure what to say about your silly analogy,
right,
then that doesn't really seem like you're backing up the claim, which is one of the reasons I think it is important to detoxify this language, because right now a lot of people on the right get a lot of mileage just out of saying the words, right? They use these almost like magic incantations, facts and logic, fact, yeah, exactly. So, logic, facts, and evidence. Even though oftentimes they're very confused about what these words even mean. Very often the sort of people that you run into, anybody who's ever argued about politics a lot on social media, has run into your kind of basement dwelling libertarian trolls who love to throw around accusations of logical fallacies, and they love to do it in really rapid fire way, right? Like that's what's really impressive for them, that they can do the instant diagnosis of what's wrong with your argument. Now, when I talk about reclaiming logic for the left, that means two things. One of them is showing what's wrong with these right-wing arguments, and oftentimes they are actually very bad arguments because they can coast by because so few people push back on them in the way, at least in the ways that I'm suggesting that they should, and, that we make more explicit arguments for our positions, but also reclaiming the way of doing logic. Because if you're just kind of listening to what somebody says and coming up with this snap judgment about what's wrong with it, then you aren't really carefully thinking about it. And so if the point of these tools, right, the kinds of things, you mentioned that I would teach in a class like a logic, reasoning, and persuasion class at Rutgers, if the point of these tools is to just be like a way of scoring points, and, making yourself look impressive to, your fellow trolls and making people feel flustered or unsure what to say, then sure, that's a good way of doing it. But if the purpose of these tools is to reason better so you're more likely to get things right, then that's exactly the wrong way to do it.
Well, and then you also have this critique, which I think, a lot of us fall into in various ways, but I think it's true that like both snark and moral condemnation are totally valid modes of communication, but they can't be the only modes. And the left has kind of fallen into a sort of over-reliance on those two tactics, which I agree. I've been persuaded by you. So then let's go back to the Ben Shapiro example, because my impulse when I read that is to make fun of his voice and just call him a transphobic twerp and move on. Explain why that analogy is bad. Why is actually the tactic that he used to fluster that woman, why is that actually not rigorous argumentation?
Yeah, so when you talk about gender and gender identity, like the small part that he's right about is that one internally consistent ways to use words like man, woman, gender, etc., is to mean like to use the word woman to mean anybody who's chromosomally female and is an adult human, and use the word man to mean biologically male adult human. And that's one internally consistent way of using those words, but of course it's not the only internally consistent way of using those words. That we can, because obviously there are people who use them consistently and coherently in this other way to talk about gender identity and gender expression. Right. And an analogy that I find really useful, that's not original to me, but comes from a trans woman who is a philosophy professor, Sophie Grace Chappelle. At least that's where I've seen it. Is to adoptive parents. So one internally consistent way of using the word parent is to exclusively refer to something biological. Mm-hmm. Or words like mother or father. That's the sense in which we use these words in a sentence like the DNA test came back and you're not the father. But sorry. As I'm sure you've heard many times before, to your great relief. Okay. But yeah, but like clearly another consistent way of using these words is to refer to somebody who has the legal or social role of a parent, and you can insist on just using it in your preferred way. Like we can imagine some bizarrely bigoted school principal who refused to allow adoptive parents to participate in parent-teacher conferences because parent has a biological definition and that's just what the word means. Right. Facts don't care about your feelings. Right. But clearly there's nothing about the biological facts or logical consistency that dictates that choice. Now, it's a lot less obvious in the case of age that there's an internally consistent way of using words like 60 or 22 that's not tied to chronology in the same way. There might be. Some people make that argument, but I don't think we can just assume that, right? That they have, and there are certainly some obvious disanalogies, like many trans people, not all of them, but many trans people will talk about having, like if somebody as a trans woman. They might talk about having always known they were a woman. And I'm not sure that it's coherent to say that you always knew you were 60 years old, right? It seems like part of what's built into being 60 is that before that you were 59 or you were 58. And just to tie this into what you said before that, it seems to me that, look, you know me pretty well at this point. I'm not anti-mockery, right? I am serially guilty of mocking people, and there are certainly things in the world that deserve moral condemnation. But the reason not to just respond to the Ben Shapiros of the world with those tools is, one, then when he makes a ridiculous, spurious argument, like this thing about gender identity and age, if you only respond by, saying that he's a bigot, and, making fun of his ridiculous voice and all of that, then you have left anybody who's not sure what to think with the impression that we don't actually have a response, that this is such a knockdown argument that, if we never get around to saying what's wrong with the argument, then people will understandably get the impression that we don't actually have a good response to that argument, and we're going to lose winnable people. And then the other problem is that if mockery and moral condemnation are our only tools, then when legitimate tactical, strategic, or policy differences come up on the left, those are the tools that we're going to turn on each other, and that gets very ugly. That gets very alienating. I think a lot of regular people, very understandably, want absolutely nothing to do with left-wing spaces that are like that internally.
Right, totally, of course. No, they're super toxic and repulsive. And I think, and people need to understand when there is actually like a real legitimate range of even really vigorous disagreement, inside context where there actually are legitimate sort of shared political goals and orientations. And I just want to use briefly, like, this isn't just in the sort of like, okay, like, yes, left-wing Twitter is toxic, whatever, like all Twitter is. But this is also like, there's many factors. But one of the reasons that, Podemos, the left-wing party in Spain, recently underperformed was because, there was actually Spanish police units trying to undermine them in a very disturbing case of political sabotage. So that's a very important thing to cover. But there also was just, and Nando Vila talks about this, just the sort of typical, almost sort of stereotypical sort of like breakdown of internal left cohesion inside the party, and like serious, really, really ugly, and in some cases clearly unnecessary infighting that undermined significantly their electoral prospects for, basically advocating some form of genuine democratic and socialist politics in Spain. So it matters a lot. Can you then get us into the other big problem? There's disanalogies. Then there's also the is-ought distinction. This is something obviously that comes up with a lot in the problems and sloppiness of someone like Sam Harris's thinking. But this but it also gets, I think, really importantly though, because this in a way sort of weaves some of the broader objections that come up. Like, no, of course we can't just, we do need to have other commitments in our reasoning, including like, ethical ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And the IDW, who you're writing a book about, all of these guys are guilty of making massive logical leaps about this subject, right? Certainly the main, the core villains, Peterson, Harris, Shapiro, all in their own way do this, right? So when Ben Shapiro says that facts don't care about your feelings, his implication is that the right gets its policy prescriptions from facts, and the left gets it from the way we feel. And this is a very common idea on the right in general, and this is particularly something that all of these guys in the IDW have just routinely have problems with. So This is a distinction that's made by the great Enlightenment philosopher from Scotland, David Hume, who talks about the distinction between facts and values, is and ought. And so this is something that logicians sometimes refer to as Hume's law. It's an actual law of logic that says basically that in order for an argument to be valid, in order for the conclusion to follow from the premises, if the conclusion is about right or wrong, good or bad, what we should do, then there has to be a premise like that too, right? You can't go straight from some factual claim to a claim about what we should do. There's always any kind of inference like that. There's always some kind of implied value premise, right? And this is something that these guys don't like to talk about, right? They like to say, if, for example, right, Ben Shapiro is talking about how tough criminal sentencing laws supposedly reduce the crime rate, and the only reason that people now see, like even Joe Biden now sees the need to run away from this is that support for getting tough on this is now no longer considered woke, right? He just had an article in the Daily Wire making this claim. Well, you can't go straight from, even if it's true, it's actually an incredibly dubious factual claim, but even if it's true, the causal claim that he's making, nothing follows about whether or not you should actually have these tougher criminal sentencing laws, because there's also this evaluative component, right? Is the only thing that we care about lower crime rates? Do we also care about the rights of criminal defendants? Do we care about civil liberties issues that might be raised by this? And Sam Harris, as you mentioned, is particularly bad on this because Harris will actually claim that his moral beliefs can be directly derived from science, which is just total nonsense, right? Science, facts in general can tell us how to get to the goals we care about, right? Once we decide what we care about, then of course all kinds of factual information can be relevant to how that we can best, most efficiently achieve those goals, right? We want to close the racial wealth gap. Should we just be looking at redistributive social programs that are universalist but that disproportionately benefit minorities? Or should we also be advocating reparations? If we have real-world examples we could point to where either of these policies were tried, then of course that could be relevant to that argument. But first, we have to actually have the goal of closing the racial wealth gap, right? So what the facts can tell us is how to achieve the goals we care about. The facts can't tell us which goals to care about in the first place. Right. And even though the people who pretend that they can make this huge deal about the rhetoric of logic, logic and facts and logic, facts and evidence, this is actually a logical principle that you actually can't do that.
And so how does that actually intersect then with, because we joked, Matt and I have a bit about how we're what was it? We're going to create the first purely emotionally driven artificial intelligence. It's the left-wing robot that cares nothing for facts and logics. It's just emotions, period. But, my understanding too, and I wonder if this does, if some of the kind of potentially, neuroscience of people like Antonio Damasio maybe potentially reflects Hume, just in the sense that can you even make these hard and fast distinctions between logic and emotion, right? Like that sort, to me, even outside of these political subcultures, there's, I guess, the the kind of pop culture Star Trek ideal of, there's what is it? Spock. Spock can think perfectly logically, and emotion does not interfere. But it seems like that, as far as we understand in terms of how people actually work as human systems, the emotional and logic components are not as divided or as separable as, somebody might make it in a thought experiment.
Yeah, well, look, I've always said Star Trek has a lot to answer for because it's given generations of television viewers the idea that logic and emotion are somehow in conflict, which they're not. Right? So of course, it's possible to be so upset that you can't think straight.
Right?
That's obviously, in the moment, right? That's obviously possible. And of course, there are lots of reasons, why there are situations in which it's important to calm down so you can think strategically about how to achieve the goals that you care about. But that doesn't mean that you stop caring about those goals in the first place. That doesn't mean that you're no longer emotionally invested in the pursuit of justice, or equality, or any of these things, because if you didn't care about those things in the first place, you wouldn't be engaged in this reasoning. And of course, it's not that you just turn off one part of your mind while you're doing while you're reasoning. Even if that were possible, I don't know that would be desirable. That's really not the point at all, right? You can care very passionately and appropriately about correcting injustice, and also think very clearly about how to get there.
Right. Now, but does this though at some point, whether we like it or not, loop back to and I've brought this up with you before. I like the Carol Gilligan example that she did at her work on spheres of care, right? And just to simplify it, that basically the descent, and she has a lot of other again, there's a lot more to her work. She's a brilliant psychologist, but the one simple thing I'll extract for this conversation is like self-care, community care, world care, and those sort of like realms of moral imagination sort of correlate with different levels of psychic, at least capacity to empathize, capacity to, again, just expand your sphere of concern. And it just seems to me like, yes, of course, there's argumentation, there's serious, there's political difference, there's, all of the, but there is this like, I don't know what the difference between somebody who, sees like a homeless encampment in LA or walks by people in sub-freezing degrees in New York, and then recognizes that there's hundreds of millions of dollars, penthouses, billions of dollars of real estate that isn't even used, and just registers that that's just absolutely morally revolting, versus somebody who either doesn't notice it, or maybe, in the Randian sense, has sort of built some type of like, bizarre, horrifying dystopian counter scenario where that's actually really healthy and really just. To me, those are expressing different baselines upon which you start an analysis. I don't know. I mean, is that escapable? I mean, again, not that people can't be persuaded, but isn't that the part of it where it's like, I don't want to say they're right because it isn't like a feeling, but it's like you come to things with, a particular sets of convictions really broadly defined. And part of that is going to be, how you relate to that example of like the homeless people versus the unused real estate.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So absolutely, it is true that, that what you start with is that you care about certain outcomes, that you're bothered by certain realities, so so you want to correct them. But of course, the important thing to emphasize here is that that's just as true for the right as for the left.
Right.
It's not that it's not that like we care about certain outcomes and our politics are driven by that, but they're somehow, being driven by facts, by, in that ridiculous Sam Harris extreme, that they're extrapolating their values from science somehow, which is logically impossible anyway. So that's not it, right? They also have goals that they care about, right? That they have that, like, one of the things that might drive you to that Ayn Rand kind of view is, well, okay, for example, if you are actually Ayn Rand, then I think the fact that, that she came from, I think, a fairly well-off family in Russia who had their stuff taken away by the Bolsheviks, or certainly at least, I don't know that much about her family background, but, that she saw this happening and she thought that was morally outrageous, right? Like that this is something that's like libertarians often tend to come to their politics from a starting point of clearly, it's outrageous, it's unjust, it makes me angry that anybody might try to take my stuff, or even that anybody might try to take anybody's stuff, right? That, like, even if you're like the libertarian who, has a working class job, but, has dreams, Horatio Alger dreams or whatever.
Right.
So and then they sort of say, okay, well, they have this moral intuition that that's bad, and then they build, and then they start reasoning about it, right? And that's not even a criticism, right? Like, I think that they have bizarre alien moral intuitions, from my perspective, that I think that taking, expropriating property so we don't have a society where some people live under bridges and some, nice buildings remain vacant, because, Russian oligarchs are just using them to park their money, that expropriation to fix that would obviously, would clearly be just. But it's inescapable that you start off with some moral intuitions, that you start off with some goals that you care about before you can even start to reason about how to achieve those goals. Now, the people who feel absolutely nothing about that scenario that you're describing, the combination of penthouses and homelessness, those are people I'm under no illusions that we can win over. Right? We're not going to. And I'm a socialist. I think that generally speaking, most people who are certainly in the 1%, right? Let's just go there, are, with some exceptions, right? But most people who are in that position are going to rationalize the justice of it to themselves, and nothing we say is going to convince them, right? There's no moral argument we can give to Jeff Bezos that will lead to him correcting the conditions in Amazon warehouses. You have to fight for that. But the process of fighting for that involves winning over a lot of people who aren't currently leftists, and so some of those people might even be currently swayed, even in complicated centrist ways, or just, complicated ways, like, the sort of guy on the street who doesn't watch the Majority Report, whose three favorite politicians are Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden and Ron Paul, right? And there's just no, but in complicated ways, people do think, they do share some of our moral intuitions, but they're also somewhat taken in by some of the stuff that the other side says, right? They do think that there's something that is screwed up about the combination of penthouses and homelessness. They're not immune from feeling that, but they sort of, they because they've heard it so much, they sort of think, oh, that wouldn't be okay to take away people's stuff in order to correct it. And so those are the people I think that you can win. You can't win all of them, but, the more of them we can win over, the more successful we're going to be. And that involves, making arguments, but some of those arguments are going to be appealing to their underlying values, like that, hey, you agree that this is really bad, right? Well, which of these is more important to you? That, Jeff Bezos gets to keep his fortune, or that, like, everybody can go to the doctor, anytime they want to, right? And
you should trust your moral intuition of the obvious answer to that question.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And, and I think that sometimes when people on the right do give sophistical arguments that that you shouldn't, right, trust that. If all we're doing is saying they're bad, they have really, whiny nasal voices, they're bad, then I don't think we're using all of the weapons in our arsenal to counter that, right? If you can show people, the reasons they're giving you for thinking that we have to accept this actually don't make sense, even on their own terms, you can kind of break it apart. That doesn't mean that like everybody is going to be magically convinced, but by what you just said, like the reaction, in an Aaron Sorkin TV show to a stirring speech. But it does, but it will get some people thinking, and some of the people who are winnable can be won over that way. And certainly, if we don't try to show what's wrong with their specious arguments, then we're preemptively surrendering, I think, at a front where we really don't need to surrender.
I agree with you completely. I just, in the last couple of minutes, and this I will say, I mean, obviously, in some ways, this is the sort of center of my book and a much broader, I mean, using the IDW in some ways as a case study to both advocate for a certain kind of synthesis of cosmopolitanism and socialism, globalism and socialism that I care a lot about, but then also more broadly that, and this is, I don't remember where this quote originated at the moment, but essentially, and plenty of people have made this point, but the distinction between the right as a naturalizing project and the left as a historicizing project. And this is the way in which, by the way, even people who take that very kind of like, internet quiz view of politics where they'll say like, oh, no, like somebody like, Sam Harris is really, center left because, I don't know, I have some quote somewhere where he supported some progressive taxation or something like this. Whereas my argument is that no, like all of these figures are fundamentally on the right. And to me, a big part of just fundamentally being on the right, even if your politics are, I don't know, say, wind up being some version of like a Clintonian Democrat or something, is if your fundamental starting point is that whether it's scientific or religious or mythological, that there are sort of like just these innate truths of things that can't be, altered. Now, obviously, some things do have innate truths of things that can't be altered, and we're not advocating like a blank slate view of people, of course. But on the other hand, like, no, there's nothing that's set in stone.
That's not the plan. That majority report year one.
No. Oh well. I mean, yes, that's more TMBS year one. Okay. But I mean, that's not a blank slate view. That's just a year one view. But that's another conversation. But there's nothing organic or innate about extreme income inequality or anything like that. Or really, that. And by the way, that's another disanalogy, right? Like, no, is everybody going to have the same height or ability to like play basketball well or tennis well? No. Does that get transferred to, therefore, some people are going to have billions of dollars of assets and other people starve? No. That's actually a really ludicrous, horrifying disanalogy. But that being said, and I sort of center it in the exchange that, when Sam Harris was really going to bat for the bell curve and advocating what I would certainly deem to be both within the field, but also more broadly, discredited and racist IQ stuff. He, in his debate with Ezra Klein, and Ezra Klein of all people is saying, look, I mean, historically, we have a lot of examples of basically European guys sitting down and saying, we've devised a quote unquote objective system that shows that we're the best. Like, who would have thunk it? And Harris, I'll paraphrase, he got very triggered and basically said the history was, I believe the word was irrelevant, if I recall correctly. And, to me, I can't think of anything, including a lot of, actually really bad, like neoliberal and woke takes I don't like, where I don't think the history is anything other than probably the most relevant. So where does that kind of, not allowing them to also not only misuse logic, but use logic as like, no, we're never going to talk about anything real. We're only going to do sort of like extended mind games with each other. So we're never going to actually talk, like we'll do sort of like our read of popular science and economics, maybe. and then a bunch of imaginative exercises. But we're going to leave, ironically, the entire empirical playing field almost always. Shapiro's different. Shapiro obviously kind of gives more of the sort of 1950s kind of view of history. But in general, that comment, the history is irrelevant to historical inquiry or unimportant to logical exchange. What's the answer to that, to bringing history and context to logic and facts?
Yeah. So I'd say that a lot of that is just a category mistake that, a lot of the people who most valorize logic on the right give you the impression that caring a lot about logic means that you try to derive everything from 3 first principles. But of course, that there's absolutely nothing about caring about good reasoning that dictates that attitude. And in fact, I would argue that caring about good reasoning should be that you don't go there, right? Because oftentimes there is going to be a clear logical relationship between some, political claims, some, some attempt to apply a moral principle to politics, and historical facts, sociological facts. And a historical argument is an argument. A sociological argument is an argument. If you want to reason well, if the goal of reasoning is to figure out the truth, then you should be looking at anything that might be relevant to helping figure it out. And it's often very revealing because, just to pick an obvious example of a case where the history is very relevant, right? We were talking earlier about libertarians who think that it's just wrong in principle to take away any of, Jeff Bezos has a moral right to every cent in his bank account, and it's just stealing if you take any of it away for redistributive programs, for example, and that then you sort of interrogate them a little bit and you say, well, okay, but why, right? And of course, they can't say because the ideal way that a society should be, right? The thing that we should really hope to end up at is some people have billions of dollars and can talk to their senator anytime they want to, and some people are working all day in the warehouse if they're even lucky enough to have a job.
Right.
Because even they wouldn't say that that's the ideal end state that we would aim at. So what they end up saying is that, well, we should. As long as things came about in the right way, right? As long as you weren't violating anybody's rights, it all came about through a free market, what the libertarian philosopher Robert Nozick calls capitalistic acts between consenting adults. Then, no matter how unequal the outcome is, it's okay. But then, of course, the obvious response is, but wait a second, that's not what happened, right? Even in Europe, capitalism emerged from feudalism, and with this massive process of enclosure and people being forced off their lands, they had to work in factories, and that's pretty cozy and consensual compared to what happened in the New World, where capitalism was literally built up by the labor of slaves on land stolen from genocide victims. And strangely enough, though, a lot of the same people who will use this kind of libertarian argument, whatever end state you end up with is cool as long as it comes out in the right way, suddenly go all Sam Harris, the history is irrelevant, when you start bringing up how it actually came about.
Right. Or again, not to bring up another example, but I remember, you in an exchange with, I don't remember, some YouTube channel kind of saying well, actually, Richard Wolff, as an example, his ideas of workplace democracy, we actually have a lot of examples of co-op models being very effective, whether we're talking about Madrigon in Spain or Cleveland in Ohio. And the guy you were debating sort of went from saying well, that's just the most ridiculous idea in the world that you could have a bottom-up workplace to, oh, okay, all right, I don't, please, enough with the examples of actual things happening. I would like to get back to my assertion.
The phrase was let's not get into the weeds.
Yeah, no, last place you'd want to get. Certainly, again, ironically, for the whole empiricism gang. So ironically, I guess I leave these conversations I usually do with you with this sort of horrifying realization that I'm a nerd. because I like to actually talk about real shit.
Keep wearing the tracksuits. It disguises it well.
Thank you very much. I shall. Ben Burgis, the book is Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left. It's available on pre-order from Zero Books. It's an excellent book, and obviously go check out his books on his videos on the Zero Books channel. You can hear him on TMBS. He's actually going to be the guest on TMBS this coming Tuesday. You can also hear him. You're going to be on Ralph Nader's podcast, right?
Yeah, I don't know when the podcast actually airs. I think it's a pre-record, but I'm going to record that on May 29th, so just before the book comes out.
Awesome, and you're on a lot with the great David Feldman. Everybody check out David Feldman's podcast. I love that podcast.
Ben, is there going to be an audiobook?
I hope so. I have talked with Doug, our editor at Zero Books, about that. And he wants to do it. It's not planned yet. There's going to be a paper book and an e-book on the 31st, and I hope at some point thereafter there's going to be an audiobook.
Cool.
Yeah, that's the only way Matt's going to read it.
No, I might buy the Kindle version.
I have the actual paperback book, and it's also the cover art of David Hume in a powdered wig shushing Ben Shapiro is one of the funniest things I've seen in quite some time. It's extremely good.
Shout out to Ryan Lake, who is a philosophy professor at Georgia State, and he's also does a regular philosophy themed webcomic called Chaos Pet, who's the person who drew that cover art.
Well, it's a great work, and I'd also just like to say, in the spirit of this more expansive kind of wrapping up, Ben and others like him are another prime reason why the capitalist classes want to completely drain all funding from any type of humanities or social science in public education, because kids should be being terrorized to work in a factory, or if they have any talent, like producing weapons.
Oh yeah, critical thinking not needed for the economy of the future.
Not good. Don't like.
Well,
that.
I'm sure you saw Bolsonaro wants to cut off all state funding to philosophy and sociology departments in Brazil.
Yep, I sure did.
Got to protect Western civilization.
Got to protect Western civilization for people who can think. Ben Burgis, everybody order the book, Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left. Ben, thanks so much.
All right, thanks so much for having me on.
Appreciate it. Seriously, guys, it's a really great book. And I would check out on TMBS YouTube channel all of the debunk segments. They're very fun. We use specific quotes from everybody from Jordan Peterson to Nancy Pelosi, and Ben will explain why they're not being logical.
Sounds good.
In a friendly and inviting way, though. Not in a...
fallacy.
Right.
In a slightly less mocking way than we typically do, although that's usually there, too.
Well, usually Ben sort of does a great job, and then he's kind of like, hey, can I mock everybody now?
He earned it.
Oh, yeah.
You have to earn it.
Yeah, you earn the mockery. And then it's like, now it's time for the ad-homs.
It's all about different. I mean, all approaches are good. I think just going direct to mockery when you have an audience that basically knows, Ben Shapiro's and Sam Harris, they're racists. It
Meghan
works.
McCain
and it's
is
fun.
a monster.
And then, people...
And your opinions.
These are opinions, yeah. I mean, they're not literally a monster.
Our opinions matter.
Who knows? Who knows? Maybe these are factual statements.
Yeah, I definitely don't know. Opinions can be facts. This is a fluid world. I have no idea.
But it's nice to, for the people who might want to, see it taken at face value for at least a moment, be like, can we actually deconstruct this?
Can we deconstruct and then have some fun? Become a member of the Majority Report today, majority.fm/become a member. That's how we pay the bills. That's how we give you this great content. JustCoffee.coop. Fair trade tea, coffee, or chocolate. A win for us, a win for labor, a win for the environment, a win for the co-op economy. It's great stuff. It's an amazing company to be associated with. Spread the word. That's how the Majority Report happens. On Tuesday on the Michael Brooks Show, we had the great Anna Kasparian. That was awesome. We had an incredible time in the main show and the post-game for patrons. Also, Dr. Meitha Al-Hassan joined us. She was brilliant, talking about Algeria, Sudan, Malcolm X. She also requested that she be on a TMBS Sam Harris tribunal, which Ben Burgess also would like to be on.
She's very sort of in tune with the poetry of the show.
She is very in tune. When she suggested the joke started because Malcolm X suggested that actually Islam could be really good for white people. And I said, I don't really...
I know somebody else with that take too, but never mind.
No. Well, actually, all kidding aside, I don't really advocate religion, but I definitely I advocate Islam for Sam Harris, and that led to a lot of an expansive exploration of ideas.
He reads the Quran the same way fundamentalists do.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
He seems like a lost soul.
Maybe I don't want him to become a Muslim because if he reads like that, it could be very bad. Not Sufi.
Muslims are like, we don't want him on our team.
That's okay. Then there's an illicit history of humanitarian law and the ICC in Africa with Kristen Pierre Anderson this weekend, patreon.com/TMBS. Go to the Majority Report YouTube channel and subscribe. And new next live show going to be announced pretty soon. Jamie, not only what's going on with the Antifada and also what's going on. One, at the end of this month, in May, you need to register to vote if you're in New York. You must do that. If you're not registered to vote by the end of May, you cannot vote in the Democratic primary. You cannot register, your opinion.
And you need to register as a Democrat if you want to vote in the Democratic primary because it's a closed primary.
And speaking from somebody who had to register to vote in New York after North Dakota didn't have voter registration when I lived there, the first time they might get you a weird rejection. I got a weird rejection the first time I did. So get it in early so you get the confirmation back.
Get it in early, get the confirmation, be very aggressive with them and make sure that they have all your right information because you obviously, if you're a New Yorker or anybody, you don't want to be missing out on voting, and New York still has incredibly ridiculous and antiquated and horrible voting laws, and it should be automatic same-day registration. But anyways, that's another conversation.
But the primaries are fun to vote in, and you can have a good effect.
They are. And by the way, obviously we've got this huge presidential race coming up, but there's a whole bunch of, how satisfying it was to knock out a IDC right-wing guy and replace him with like a good progressive who help fight the Amazon
Myrie,
deal.
what's his
Zellner Myrie.
Zellner Myrie, yeah.
Zellner Myrie, he's really good.
Good dude.
So it matters on all sorts of levels. Or even when you come up short, it was awesome to campaign for Jabari Bridgeport as an example for city council. All right. Sorry about that. Jamie, tell us about the show, but also there's the DSA thing too, right?
Indeed.
Okay.
This week on the Antifada, we're a little late posting the episode because my husband screwed up the sound recording, but it's coming out later today. We have... Indeed. We have a roundtable with noted BreadTube content creators Non-Compete, The Surfs, and Means TV.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So I was away at the Drone Festival over the weekend. So this is all Sean. I'll read what he wrote. We discussed the sociological and structural reasons why the alt-right has gained near hegemony over YouTube and other platforms, and what anti-capitalist content creators are doing to fight back. The Surfs give a cautionary tale about being deplatformed by a coordinated right-wing attack and how tons of people, including the Majority Report family, helped pressure Google into giving them back their channel. Lastly, special guest Nick presents the vision behind Means Media, which aims to build a collectively owned and operated left media cooperative as an alternative platform that will help seize the means from our corporate media overlords.
Very cool.
So they're the ones who did that very viral ad for AOC.
Yep, and they also did another. I want to always give honorable mention because even though unfortunately it didn't work out for him, but they also their ad for Kaniela Ng, who ran in Hawaii, was amazing.
Yeah, they do good
really
stuff.
good work,
and it's like
we love the Surfs. We love the Surfs.
Yeah, and it's very much like all different kinds of leftists on this channel. It's very pan leftist operation. So everyone from DSA people, AOC types to like anarchists and communists and everybody.
Awesome.
Yeah. Oh, and also, I'm glad you reminded me.
Yes.
We are having a fundraiser party for the North Brooklyn DSA this weekend. I'm going to put a link to the tickets in the blog post that I'm going to write after the show. You don't have to come to buy a ticket. So if you don't live here, you can still support the work we're doing. But it's going to be super fun. I hope some of you guys can come and hang out and dance and have a good time. We have a live band. We have a communist drag queen named Comrade Barbie.
Nice.
It's going to be amazing.
Sam and I might stop by.
That would be very nice.
Like as a team?
Probably not as a team. No,
Are you his wingman now?
They go everywhere
Feeling
together.
left out, Matt.
It's like, hi.
You see them walking through Brooklyn.
Hello. Can I engage you in an argument? Do you see?
He'd be a real hit.
Matt?
Literary Hangover, the most recent thing published, is just for patrons. But if you want to know why Orwell was very skeptical of the Popular Front, basically his dividing line comes to he goes to Spain for the Spanish Civil War, is fighting with the anarchists and the Trotskyists, specifically in Catalonia, and he sort of buys the idea that you might want to stop the revolution a little bit to fight the war. But his problem comes when the revolutionary gains are being reversed. And I think actually that's sort of a good approach to take to popular fronts in general, that not a single thing is done on behalf of capital in that time of Popular Front. Otherwise, you call it off because it's basically just a handmaiden to fascism at that point.
Absolutely. I love it. All right. I'm not sure. I just want to do a heads up. I know people get very intense about the IMs, but it's not opening. So we'll see if we can deal with that. But we will see you in the fun half. Welcome back to the fun half. Apologies, still have not gotten the IMs open. Let's take a quick call.
Hello.
Is that our new technical difficulties? You're calling from a 517 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Matt from Michigan.
Matt from Michigan?
Can you hear me? Yeah, can you hear me?
Now I can. Yeah, go ahead, Matt. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I was calling because I know that
Hello? Matt?
I think he fell into Lake Superior.
Oh, sorry, Matt. Call back. Okay.
Yeah.
No,
You
Matt.
there?
Yeah, are you there? Go ahead.
sorry, my headset was catching out. I know in the past Matt had said that he wanted to hear about podcasts that were from like just general states and whatnot.
Go ahead.
Yeah, local coverage. What do you got?
What do you got, buddy?
Yeah, so you guys kind of inspired me a long time ago. It's been a long project. I'd called in a couple different times trying to find my way, and we finally are launching a podcast called Flak Racket Radio. It looks at Michigan politics through like a socialist lens and with a specific focus on the really bad media that covers it.
Awesome.
It will be launching later this week, and you can follow it at Flak, just the same way that spelled like manufacturing consent, FLAK, radio. Sorry, a little nervous.
No worries. It's good. Go ahead.
Flak Racket Radio on Twitter, just at Flak Racket Radio, and all the links will be in there.
Thanks so much, man. Congratulations.
There you go,
Looking
Michigan.
forward to listening to it. Thank you.
And I appreciate the Chomsky reference.
Chomsky reference is good. You're calling from a 347 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from? Hello.
Excuse me?
347. Are you there?
You hear me?
Yep, can hear you.
You hear me? Okay. Hey, this is David. I'm calling from Queens.
Hey, David. What's going on?
Well, really want to talk about is the New York Times just released this article today. It's a dossier related to a Venezuelan politician. I'll see if I can pull up his name real quick.
Uh-huh.
He's the one of like Lebanese descent. I forgot what his name was.
Leopold
give me a second. It's right here.
Is it?
No, it's Tarek El-Aissami.
Okay, I'm not familiar with him. Go ahead. Is he affiliated with Maduro?
Apparently, he's like one of Maduro's right. He apparently is like one of Maduro's right-hand men.
Okay.
And it links him to like the drug trade. Allegedly, he's sneaking like Hezbollah militants into the country and stuff like that.
So the Hezbollah story has been around for a long time, and I would that one I would have take with a major grain of salt. Now, if what they mean by that, and it's very well documented that there's definitely connections inside the Venezuelan government to the cartel trade. There's no doubt about that. And there's frankly connections with a lot of governments in the region with the cartel trade, right? So if they're saying that there might be distribution networks that are connected with Hezbollah in terms of like just sort of general underground economy stuff, maybe that sounds plausible. But the idea that Venezuela is like secretly bringing in Hezbollah fighters, I mean, that sounds quite nutty to me until proven otherwise.
Yeah, it does sound pretty nutty to me.
Yeah, I don't know if they're trying to
also,
imply
I
that.
think it's,
what are they saying that they're bringing them in like in the same way they've gone into Syria, or are they? Because I've been hearing this for years.
I think so. It also says that apparently they're like hoarding pounds and pounds of urea in order to manufacture cocaine and stuff like that.
Well, that might be true. There's definitely connections between Venezuelan military and government officials and drugs. There's also been, on the opposite ends of the ledger, Alvaro Uribe, who's the former Colombian president, there was, he denied them strenuously, but there was diplomatic cables connecting him with people like Pablo Escobar. I mean, the truth of the matter is like cocaine is a huge currency source, and it's been, harnessed by both sides of politics and obviously harnessed by the CIA. So, yeah.
Yeah, and he doesn't need to sneak in Hezbollah fighters because most of the army has not yet defected and probably isn't going to. So that seems like it would be a lot more trouble than it's worth.
Well, there's a lot of, I don't know, again, there's been this like real long-term conspiracy theory, I think implying somehow that like Hezbollah operations closer to the Americas. And the thing is like, again, maybe if you're talking about underground, like illicit currency, drug or money flows, or currency is money, or weapons flows, like I'm sure there could be networks. That's totally possible. And that's, again, that's its own global business that connects
everybody on some level. Like, people should, really realize how, the line between underground and overground economy is a lot more blurry than people look. And I would go back as an example to Taibbi's reporting on money laundering for Mexican cartels by HSBC, which they admitted to, and nobody had any criminal charges. But
a big part of the British Empire was the drug trade.
Was opium. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So but the idea that Hezbollah is about to spring up in the United States because of Venezuela is nutty. Thank you for the call, man. All right, let's take one more call for now, and then we'll do some sound. You're calling from Skype. Are you there?
Hello, is this me?
Yes, this is you.
Hello.
Hello, what's your name? Where are you calling from?
Oh, I'm planning through. Oh, my name is Ian, and I'm calling from London.
Hey, Ian, what's on your mind?
Hey, so I guess I have three topics that I'd like to discuss, but you can choose. So you can talk about Venezuela, a primer on stuff that's going on in the UK, or, one of those two things, whichever one tickles your fancy.
Well, we'll get back to Venezuela in a second. What did you want? Are you talking about the defense secretary getting sacked by Theresa May, or what's happening? Give us a little UK update.
So, UK update. It's kind of funny because it's now a month after Brexit was supposedly meant to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really weird because the whole political culture at the moment is sort of defined by Brexit, but because nothing's actually happening, we're even more now in this weird dead zone of just every politician is defining their politics by Brexit, but then there is so much more happening behind the scenes that isn't being talked about. And I guess the one thing that this has given space to growth is Extinction Rebellion. I'm sure that you guys know that.
Yep.
There were protests about 2 weeks ago, and I think that they were probably the most successful, how can I put it, displays of public gathering and solidarity that I've seen in a very long time. And I think that there are Extinction Rebellion is the one thing I would point towards to say that the Occupy movement wasn't a failure, because I think you'd agree as well that I think that one of the most important things that came out of Occupy was the idea of the 99%, under the 1%,
definitely,
as well as sort of introducing this culture of decentralized, horizontal political strategy and planning and communication and all of that stuff. Personally, I was introduced to this during the austerity cuts in 2011 related to the student movement, the student finance, where they're going to increase uni fees and all of that. But I think Occupy was the first time this was introduced to the mainstream. And I think another thing that is a real sign of progress is two things. First of all, they use the same techniques as Occupy, but this time there was a definite goal.
Right.
Even if it isn't sort of set in policy, it's whoa, the world's fucked. We need to do something, versus, the 1% are fucking us, capitalism, retete. I think normies, let's say, don't sort of, that's very easy to brush off, whereas saying, whoa, we need to radically change the world, otherwise we're all going to die, is a much more direct thing. And also I think, I don't know what culturally has happened the past year or 2 years. Maybe a few David Attenborough documentaries have come out, maybe all these reports have come out. But if I'm going to compare this Extinction Rebellion compared to two previous public protests that happened in the UK, specifically Extinction Rebellion, I think a year ago, and also Black Lives Matter UK 2-3 years ago, there's a similar protest in Heathrow highlighting the fact that the Global South was going to be impacted the most by climate change. In that instance, it was very easily brushed off. The media was like, ha ha ha, Black Lives Matter UK. Black people aren't killed here like they are in America. And everyone's like, well, firstly, just because we kill black people much less in the UK doesn't mean that that kind of systemic discrimination doesn't happen. And number two, it's sort of broadening the horizons of who's really going to be impacted by climate change. But I guess generally speaking, I think the last Extinction Rebellion really... it was really successful.
That's great. And I think also Jeremy Corbyn, announced that he would treat climate as a national emergency if and when he becomes prime minister. That's a huge dent too. And I agree with you. I think there needs to definitely. I think there are problems with the sort of some of the directionless organizing, and I think you do need actually some leadership and some design. I think that's clear, but I also never thought of Occupy as a failure. I think Occupy is, if we get out of this predicament, Occupy will be a moment that people point to as being really pivotal. Thanks, Ian. Thanks for the call, man. Appreciate it. Shouts to Extinction Rebellion. Gregory, okay, the IMs are open. Gregory from Oklahoma. As an Oklahoman, I always get pissed when people point to Kansas as the trickle-down economics failure, when Oklahoma is an even better example. More importantly, at least Kansas has raised those taxes back since 2010, where we only continued to cut taxes since 2010. I'm glad you've talked about how bad Oklahoma is doing back in a video in 2016. Love you guys. Thames Darwin. Michael, you might recall that I provided a Marshall McLuhan moment some years ago when I disagreed with Kelly Carey and stated that as even a Holocaust educator, I find the phrase oven-ready beta cuck humorous. I bring this up only to let you know that I'll be on the Doomed podcast tonight with Matt Binder at around 9:30 talking about Holocaust denial. Interested MR beauties should tune in. That's a great idea. Watch Doomed with Matt Binder and Thames Darwin.
Smart guys.
Very smart guys doing great things.
What didn't Kelly like?
It was a really funny phrase. It was called oven-ready beta cucks.
I think said in the right-wing Mandela voice.
I think so. It's like a bunch of oven-ready beta cucks.
Oh, jeez.
Sam Seder, oven-ready beta cuck. On the majority report, we're whining and bitching because we don't like leadership. I remember that really embarrassing clip where James Mattis in an interview, it was so doubly embarrassing because basically James Mattis, who it's like, look up James Mattis Fallujah, actually does have a record of like almost certain war crimes if you investigate it, in my estimation. He was in an interview and they asked him does anything keep you up at night question. And he literally did like the Clint Eastwood, my enemies stay up at night. And that was already like, okay, dude, like your defense secretary or general, like, come on, like don't do like movie shit like that. But whatever, right? And then the like conservative pajama boy media like collectively busted a massive nut. And that's the only, I'm sorry, I know it's gross, but it's the only thing I could say. Like they lost their minds.
Oh, it's like something out of a movie.
They thought it was
that.
And they put out this one of the most embarrassing, like it was literally Mattis saying that in between like a bear growling. Like it was one of the dumbest, most embarrassing, most cringe-inducing things I've ever seen in my life. And
I
remember
edited it together with Walter White going, "I am the danger" too.
I might as well have. Totally. You're in the mindset. But I remember, I think there was like a couple weeks where right-wing Mandela was like, "Did you see Mattis in fucking beast mode, Rachel?" Remember that? He's like, I don't fucking stay up. They're the ones who fucking stay up.
I must have missed that one.
I think that was before I think that was in the oven-ready beta cook era. So let's get to Venezuela. Again, has Maduro and the Venezuelan government, is there cases of corruption? Yes. Should they have tried to update their currency policy? Gregory Wilpert, who was the director of Telesur, who's now at the Real News Network, has criticized them for that directly. Are there some human rights abuses? No doubt. Conversely, in Brazil, Lula's in prison and, with no evidence, and Juan Guaido is roaming the streets calling for a coup. So I think that's something to bear in mind. If you want to measure what is and is not the responsibility of the Venezuelan government, you need to lift U.S. sanctions and stop trying to instigate a coup, and also end now a couple of decades worth of economic subterfuge aimed from the world's great superpower and, of course, the prime imperial interferer in Latin America against Latin America. And now Jeffrey Sachs, who at this point in his career is a very different profile. I mean, it always should be mentioned that he was, a horrible influence in Russia in the 1990s. Definitely contributed to a huge amount of corruption and human suffering when the World Bank and IMF and Wall Street were pillaging Russia in the 90s. But he does great work, and he's on Democracy Now!, and he's going to lay out the reality of what U.S. sanctions have done and do to Venezuela.
So the U.S. government has been trying to strangle the Venezuelan economy. It started with sanctions in 2017 that prevented essentially the country from accessing international capital markets and the oil company from restructuring its loans. That put Venezuela into a hyperinflation. That was the utter collapse. Oil earnings plummeted. The earnings that are used to buy food and medicine collapsed. That's when the social humanitarian crisis went spiraling out of control. And then in this year is with this idea, very naive, very stupid in my view, that there would be this self-proclaimed president, which was all choreographed with the United States very, very closely. Another round of even tighter sanctions, essentially confiscating the earnings and the assets of the Venezuelan government took place. Now Venezuela is in complete, utter catastrophe. A lot of it brought on by the United States deliberately, creating massive, massive suffering. We know there's hunger. We know there's incredible shortage of medical supplies. We can only imagine, because we won't know really until the dust settles and careful studies are done, how much excess mortality there is. But surely in a context like this, this is a catastrophe largely created by the U.S. because, as was said earlier, this is an all-or-nothing strategy. What Trump just doesn't understand, and what Bolton, of course, never agrees to, is the idea of negotiations. This is an attempt at an overthrow. It's very crude, it's not working, and it's very cruel because it's punishing 30 million people.
That's all 100% correct and objective reality. And another thing that's very important to underline there is that those of us who oppose a coup, those of us who oppose economic warfare against Venezuela, are quite supportive of initiatives from the Vatican, from Uruguay, from Mexico, for diplomatic negotiations to update the reality of the Venezuelan government. And also at the same time, yes, this is not going to happen inside Venezuela because of the Venezuelan people. There is a critical, and they have tried so many times at this point to do this, going back to the Chavez era, which of course was even more ludicrous. Chavez was an incredibly popular leader, and he did a lot to improve the material conditions of people while not, making broader strategic transformations that you would need to, de-link from commodities. But that's a challenge that all of the pink tide governments in Latin America, along with U.S. interference, faced. But the configuration of the fact that on a realpolitik level, the military is entwined with the government, the fact that indigenous, poor, and people of color absolutely have done better even now under Chavismo, and no doubt are not going to do well under a U.S.-backed oligarch government. They're not idiots. Sorry, U.S. imperialists. And also, I think another contingent of people that, as Anna pointed out on my show the other day, she said, look, she has family in Venezuela, and she said, they don't like when you call Maduro a dictator. They think he is a bad leader who has economic policies they don't like, and they would like to see it changed. But he's not a dictator. Now, that's a crucial distinction.
Yeah,
people inside Venezuela don't support him. So there's enough people in Venezuela that just don't want an outside coup. That shouldn't be so hard for people to figure out.
Yeah, if he were really a brutal dictator, Guaido would not be alive right now, let alone free to come and go as he pleases.
Let alone free to release another guy from house arrest. Again, look at, in Brazil, you have a iconic, hugely impressive president in jail with no evidence and solitary. In this country, where a guy is going on Periscope every couple of days saying, all right, guys, it's Juan Guaido, just starting my live stream. The queue's about to start. Waiting for a couple more people to drop in. He's still running around. And I think, look, the terrifying scenario here and the very possible scenario is U.S. actual military intervention. There's a report today
And Guaido is getting more and more brazen. Do we have that Guaido clip? Is that where he? I mean, basically, Juan Guaido is saying he needs more military support. So the cravenness and the transparency of this is getting clearer and clearer. And this is a report from Business Insider that was released, I believe. This is from today. The U.S. military is on the balls of its feet about Venezuela crisis. Here's what that means, according to a former NATO commander. Again, we'll see this. There's a lot of different chatter coming in and out. And maybe, this could be disinformation to threaten the Venezuelan government and make them scared, right? So we don't know. But at the same time, we cannot preclude this. And we also have to remind ourselves, the Reagan administration caught a huge, easy propaganda victory by going and deposing a socialist government in Grenada. Now, this would be a lot harder to do in Venezuela than Grenada, but the idea of a right-wing administration deposing a local government for, good TV, in Trump's words, in Trump's understanding, is very much the norm. The Defense Department has said little about, now I'm quoting now from Business Insider, the Defense Department has said little about its planning and potential action towards the South American country where political and economic turmoil have eviscerated the public and led to international condemnation for President Nicolas Maduro, blah, blah, blah. In recent days, however, U.S. Navy Admiral Craig Fuller, the head of the U.S. Southern Command, which oversees U.S. operations south of Mexico's northern border, has said his forces are, quote-unquote, on the balls of their feet. Fuller hasn't said much about what that means, but James Stavridis, a retired admiral who led Southern Command and was a NATO Supreme Allied Commander, elaborated on Monday about what's going on at the command's Miami headquarters. Their job is to look out through the entire hemisphere to the south, Stavros said during an appearance on the Hewitt show. And I'm skipping ahead now. Balls of their feet means they're getting out all their operational plans. They're looking out for all of their military forces deployed throughout the region, particularly maritime forces in the Caribbean, but air, sea, and land, everything. Now, this also, and there's a couple of other things that I want to just note here. A group of Caribbean states who are taking an enormous risk and are absolutely treated as colonial property of the United States in all administrations. And initially, and this is actually a big reason why this is among many reasons, but the reason there's been these massive uprisings in Haiti partially has been because of this Haitian government's subservient role in support of the Trump administration's coup mongering against Venezuela. So there are Caribbean governments that have supported the hawkish coup policies of Trump and Pence at the Organization of American States, and they all signed up for the they've backed them in the past. However, and this is a report from Telesur, Caribbean nations have called for and recommit to a peaceful solution in Venezuela. And they go on. Bolton, in a press conference during the day, called Venezuela's top military officers, including the commander of the Army and National Guard, to back Guaido, warning of untold consequences if they didn't. But Venezuela's Caribbean neighbors, who of course will face the consequences of an invasion and or civil war in Venezuela more than we will, although in fact this will be another factor in the border crisis and terrorism against migrants of the Trump administration. But Venezuela's Caribbean neighbors, including those that supported Washington's tough anti-Venezuela stance at the Organization of American States, OAS, all signed up to the chairman's declaration of the regional grouping's continued preference for a peaceful solution to the Venezuela crisis. Chairman of the 13-member Caribbean community, CARICOM, Dr. Timothy Harris, worked the phones Tuesday to remain appraised of the situation in Venezuela, where self-imposed U.S.-backed interim quote-unquote President Guaido has called for a national uprising and for a national army to help him unseat Nicolas Maduro. Harris, who's also the Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, spent much of the day in consultation with other Caribbean leaders and CARICOM Secretary General Edwin LaRouche regarding developments in Venezuela, where opposition figures serving jail term under house arrest has joined Guaido in street protests and participated in what Caracas says was an attempt to mislead soldiers at a military base in the capital city. So the Caribbean region
generally opposes this. Of course, the Bolsonaro regime has been supportive, but the Brazilian military has been much more concerned about the escalation. Colombia is on board, and Colombia is governed by a hard far-right government in the Bolsonaro mold. Now, the question about this, though, is Trump, I think, has been obviously belligerent about this from the beginning, and I think he does think of Panama and Grenada and wants a war. But I also think, obviously this is orchestrated by the Pompeos and the Boltons. And, some people were tweeting out, I think Max Blumenthal, maybe some other people were tweeting out him being on with Trish Regan. And again, this is disgusting in every level, but he sounds kind of burned out.
On the table. I know there was a big NSC meeting today, and you get all your top people trying to go through various scenarios, trying to figure out what to do next. Really, what are our options right now, Mr. President?
Well, some of them I don't even like to mention to you because they're pretty tough. But we see what's happening with respect to the hunger. You don't see things like this anymore, and they don't want food.
I'm sorry, hypocrisy doesn't matter, but this is an administration that every day is literally backing a genocidal air war in Yemen. So I think you see things like this and much worse. But anyways, go ahead.
Anymore. And they don't want food. Maduro won't accept food. I think he should, frankly. I think it would be better for him if he did, because you have people that are starving and they become desperate, and you see what's happening on the streets. And the streets are very dangerous, and it's very dangerous for, frankly, everybody. And we haven't seen a scene like this in many, many years. And when you think how wealthy this country was, Trish, this country was one of the wealthy countries, not just there, but this was one of the wealthy countries of the world. And now you look at what's going on where they don't even have food, where they can't get water. The water is filthy dirty. And people are getting sick. It's a terrible, terrible thing.
No, look, it's a tragedy, and it's a tragedy that's so close to home.
Oh, you're talking about
less
Flint?
than 4 hours from Miami. What do you think about Nicolas Maduro?
Well, he's certainly run it tough, but I think he's losing a lot of control. He really did go out and do things that are bad. It's an extension of his previous, and previous was bad. It was unacceptable. It was horrible and unacceptable. It's really a failure of socialism, and I don't know, maybe this is beyond socialism, but this is socialism, and you see what happens. Now they're talking about it for our country. I can't believe it's real, when you hear some of the things being said, but they're talking about socialism for our country. That's not going to happen, especially with how well we're doing. But Maduro is he's a tough player, and
pause it. There it is. There's the tell. Now and I think the most investment he has is in the propaganda purposes against people like Bernie Sanders in the United States. But he's a tough player. That's support. So yeah, that's.
Wow. So how likely are we to actually do a ground invasion of Venezuela? Because
or fly some drones over or something.
They thought about it in 2002 when they were attempting a coup on Chavez, and the opposition there was like, oh yeah, we've totally got everyone on our side, just it'll be great. And then they realized that wasn't true, and the U.S. backed off. Is that going to happen again?
Well, the thing in 2002 was it was so overwhelming. Obviously this is not Chavez era, right? There's way more discontent than there was during Chavez. But what happened in 2002 is that they arrested Chavez for 48 hours. There was a huge uprising on the streets, and he talked his own guards into letting him out. They basically were like, no, we don't, you're actually cool. They flew him back to the presidential palace, and the people that led the coup fled the country. And the Bush administration and the New York Times editorial page who endorsed it were highly embarrassed.
This image of Guaido giving a speech, I think, yesterday. If I'm Trump, I'm like, what? It was 360p? Don't you have HD cameras in there?
This guy does not look like a tough player.
Can someone paint, maybe get some wallpaper on there, some gold leaf wallpaper? And you got this two dumb statues. Like, this is not impressive.
This is
I
not
think
a tough player.
That's part of the problem is they haven't found a guy
that Trump can relate to.
Yeah, to get.
He
to
looks
lead
like
the coup.
Obama.
Yeah.
Reminds me of Obama.
Yeah,
Why does he remind me of
Beto-looking
Obama?
guy.
Yeah, get me a shirtless guy on a horse, then we'll talk.
Yeah. Hey guys, this is Juan Guaido. Just gonna wait for some other people to come in the stream. We're trying. We're gonna go to the Air Force Base. We're trying for another coup.
Oh, you like the statues? Yeah.
It'd be pretty rad if the CENTCOM or Southern Com or whatever com could maybe come back us up here. That would be. Thank you for the likes. Appreciate it. Trying to do a coup.
It's fascinating to see them do optics like this, though, right? Like when it's just not working. Because he should be in the street or something, right? Like instead he's in some like nondescript room that has no significance to anybody with just some statues in front of him. It's so bizarre looking. It's pathetic, frankly.
It's sad. It's very sad. And again, if you were interested in dealing with the crisis in Venezuela, you'd lift all sanctions and then you would support trusted regional players to broker a diplomatic process. And part of that diplomatic process, by the way, might mean that people like Maduro get ousted and the genuine Chavismo who've been marginalized and sidelined by them could actually come to power. And there
like
are
the communes?
Like the communes, like other, again. So
like I don't know if
it's
people
not about
realize,
beautifying what's happening there. But go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if people realize this was and is still to some degree like a dual power situation. Like there are communes in Venezuela where people, communists and anarchists have set up like a dual power scenario running the local shit. I'm being very inarticulate, but and Maduro, and they still support him critically, and one of the left critiques of him is that he hasn't dispersed power to the communes quite fast enough, but he's dealing with a lot of really difficult shit right now.
He is, and look, and he might just be a bad leader and a kleptocrat. And even that might be the case, but that is not. I mean, there's the other principle at work here that, look, Venezuela is more interesting, and the history of the government, of the Bolivarian government, is even if it was a failure, was a noble failure that has done many really good things. And certainly I defend Chavez, but I also, again, we're not doing spin and propaganda. We can own the problems. But, there is the other principle at work here that kind of is astounding with people. It's like I opposed, I didn't want a regime change action in Syria. And I offended a lot of people because I was not willing to pretend that Bashar al-Assad has not killed hundreds of thousands of people and has not engaged in extraordinary war crimes that look far, as of course, again, I'll always say, we've committed war crimes in Syria. The Saudis have committed war crimes, the Emiratis, the Russians, and Assad, okay? Now, Saddam Hussein, invading Iraq is still one of the worst things that happened in our lifetimes. Now, Saddam Hussein, there was no left defense of Saddam Hussein. So Venezuela is way more complicated, and there is a lot to defend about the Bolivarian government. But there is another element to this where it's like people come at me with all this stuff about Venezuela, some of which I think is bullshit and wrong, some of which is, I think, actually correct and very damning. All of that in a situation like this is totally secondary to opposing a U.S. coup, period. Case closed. It's not that complicated. K-State Senate. Michael, what does left-wing George W. Bush think of Biden? So either fundamental change or you have continuity, which will lead to more empire. Let's do. Let's play a little bit more sound. So this is just probably. Wait, what is this Beto one?
It's him taking a fossil fuel pledge, not to take fossil fuel.
Okay, we'll get to that in a second. Let's do this bar stuff first. So, look, again, does the fact that Bill, I guess let me kind of revisit first and reset the Russia thing. I still think, in my view, the critique of the deployment of Russia in media and certain Democratic Party circles, particularly in 2016, 2017, stands.
and of course, this broader investigation, especially if it's framed, as we've always said, if you talk about it like Goodfellas, not the Manchurian Candidate, this report was going to reveal a lot of stuff. And, Bill Barr obviously misrepresented the Mueller report. I mean, Bob Mueller is not writing this letter because he wants, a good ratio on resistance Twitter. He thinks his work has been misrepresented. Now, is this, again, as with so many things of Trump, it's a question of degree, not kind. And I don't think that, attorney generals and other administrations have obviously, play for their team. Bill Barr is a guy that you could trust and take at face value while you take any of these people at face value is extraordinary. But when you go back to the fact that the guy literally got his career started in helping put out the Iran-Contra affair, which still to me stacks as a far more significant, far-reaching scandal than this, should say something. He's refusing to speak in front of the House Judiciary Committee because despite the best efforts of Lindsey Graham and other Republicans to continue this spin and obfuscation and lies, this was a bad day for him. And the primary takeaway of the bad day, we're not going to play all of it, we'll play some more of it tomorrow, was Kamala Harris, who really, this is her in her element. She crushed it, and he did not like it.
Barr, has the president or anyone at the White House ever asked or suggested that you open an investigation of anyone?
I wouldn't.
Yes or no?
Could you repeat that question?
I will repeat it.
Yeah.
Has the president or anyone at the White House ever asked or suggested that you open an investigation of anyone? Yes or no, please, sir?
The president or anybody else?
Seems you would remember something like that and be able to tell us.
Yeah, but I'm trying to grapple with the word suggest. There have been discussions.
That's exactly right. Is, baby.
Depends on what the word suggests.
Yeah. You grapple with it. Go.
There have been discussions of matters out there that they have not asked me to open an investigation, but
perhaps they've suggested.
I don't know. I wouldn't say suggest.
Hinted.
I don't know.
Inferred. You don't know. Okay.
She's got you covered, scumbag.
IDK.
I love that she went through all of the different words that you could worm out of your way with that.
Hashtag bully the right people.
Hashtag bully the right people. It's incredibly well done. I think also, I think White House did a little bit better, but the amount of Democratic senators that will still say and you will promise and you will return to this committee is mind blowing. It's they will lie. And they will do whatever the fuck they please. And that is the only tactic that is going to yield anything, which is just ruthless clarity. So she did a very good job on that. I will, as always, make my usual pitch, which is, of course, obviously I support Bernie Sanders because I'm progressive. If you're voting in the centrist lane, which I would encourage you not to because we need to do real big things for this world.
But if for some reason you found your way onto our YouTube page,
if you found your way on the YouTube page, can you X out Biden and Buttigieg and vote for Kamala Harris? Come on, I do not understand. That is the no-brainer centrist center-right choice in my view. Anyway, yeah, go ahead.
The fact that this many mediocre white men have piled into the clown car after Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren is ludicrous, and it shows how far we have not come.
But the thing to me is that is definitely part of it. But I'm talking also just look, I'm very able to acknowledge that Joe Biden has real political skills. I find Buttigieg, I get why elite people are excited about him. I think his skills are actually not going to be broadly transferable. But it's also that Kamala Harris is good at this, right? Frankly, even on these other levels, look, Elizabeth Warren has the substance. I don't think she necessarily has the same skill set politically. Also, I think she's on the center left and progressive side versus the centrist to center right side.
That's why she needs to be vice president for 8 years, and it'll train her to be president.
Oh, I like that. And then there's, and then to me, I'm sorry, Booker and Gillibrand or O'Rourke. Sorry, Yeah, these are just not. But like Kamala Harris is good. Like I just don't understand. If you're in that lane, she's the obvious choice. Here she is with, she's a talented politician and a clear communicator when she chooses to be. I mean, obviously she obfuscates on things, but they all do except for Sanders and Warren. This is her with Chris Matthews, and this is just an opportunity to do a Chris Matthews impression.
I guess the question is, once he's testified before Mr. Mueller's special counsel investigation, how can he now say, I won't make the same testimony in public claiming executive privilege? I think it is sort of like virginity kind of thing. Once you start talking about a matter in your jurisdiction, and then you say, oh, I'm not doing it anymore, you can't do it once you've started. So I understand that's how executive privilege works. Once you've given it up, you can't grab it back. How do you see it?
I'm not going to go with you on that metaphor, Chris.
Okay.
But I will say this. Dick Durbin did an excellent job of pointing out that there is no, I think, valid reason why he, being the Attorney General, should object to Don McGahn coming before the United States Congress and testifying.
Okay, fine, whatever, play it safe. But back to the virginity thing. Yeah, but back to the virginity thing. There were a lot of girls in Catholic school. They had various tactics.
You go to the sock hop and they'd be dancing all around you. You get a big boner.
But we realized at a certain point, it was like Father Coughlin said, it wasn't in the technicality, it was the intention, and that's how we say it in God's law. It's Thomas Aquinas. Anyways, you're very smart. Thank you.
I actually thought it was going to be like sometimes when Chris Matthews is kind of jolly and he's using like insane metaphors and ridiculous, and he's just sort of like, all right, you're not going to go with the virginity thing, but great job today, Kamala. Thank you. That one was where he's just like, oh, all right, fine. I guess I'll be the only one to use an obvious metaphor.
Everyone's a critic.
Everyone's a critic. Sorry, I can't ruffle papers and do boring anecdotes from the 70s to explain why Donald Trump is secretly a KGB agent.
Sort of like
That'd be great if everything just became a Rachel Maddow subtweet.
Didn't he look sort of like someone who's never used a prophylactic before? Okay, yeah, I guess I'm the only one who's seen that. Sure.
You got to spice up the material somehow.
Sure. Dude, if you are voting for a center-right candidate, vote for Kamala Harris. Jesus. She is the... There's the first and second choice. Then there's like I'll just say Inslee's my third choice because like why not? Climate change, good stuff. And then there's like all right, dude, gun to your head. Nobody you like is running. Who do you vote for? And Harris is the total fucking no-brainer for that. I'm sorry.
She's not on our side, but I respect her.
In sort of fantasy sports, there's a concept called the replacement level player.
Right.
When you're a player you can always put on your roster who's just sitting out and not picked up, but they'll just be sort of a neutral fill-in. That's Kamala Harris. Biden and just talk about Biden. Biden's worse than that. Biden is going backwards. Like someone's like, America's not ready to go really hard left. Like Biden's not going at all left. Biden is a lurch to the right.
No, Biden's own politics are centrist politics, and he wants to compromise from that with the Republicans.
Absolutely. And look, I'm not, but to me, like that all could describe Harris as well, in addition to her record in the carceral state. So mine is like purely just like, we're just getting down to the level of like, you need to replace Trump, and who will I find to be the least annoying to be talking to me for 4 years? And
yeah,
Harris
control.
Yeah, literally that's it. So actually on the merits, like I think her record is horrifying. I mean, look at the piece in the Huffington Post about what happened to parents of the truancy stuff. But
like who would I be least embarrassed to have representing us on the world stage?
Yes. When you force Jamie to talk like an NPR host, that means that your choice is Kamala Harris of that pack. And and by the way, if it was down to two, I would pick Joe Biden over Pete Buttigieg. One of them didn't work at McKinsey. Sorry. One of them's blue collar.
That's a choice I hope I never have to make.
I would pick Biden, not because I think Buttigieg is probably operator enough to maybe be a little bit better than Biden, who might have some old boy loyalties. But I think I trust Biden's competence to beat Trump more than I trust Buttigieg.
That's another thing too. I actually
electability,
which we're not supposed to. You don't talk about electability,
except when you do.
Do you see? So. I'll tell you what. I'll tell you, probably the only person who dislikes Pete Buttigieg more than me is probably Beto O'Rourke. Beto O'Rourke, I've loved how fast, and look, obviously it's still early and blah, 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 though he already looks a little bit more bummed than he did.
He looks like Rand Paul, like deep into the Republican primary.
I know. He looks like he's getting acquainted with life.
This is the first time anyone's ever told him he can't have something.
Right. So I think that, look, again, I'll do the usual disclaimer that it's still early in the process and things could change and blah, 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 blah,
let's
blah.
not jinx it.
Let's not jinx it. But this was ridiculous. Like, this guy had a national brand because he's got some kind of basic vanilla charisma and he's a nice guy. And he was running against Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz is the most repulsive human being on planet Earth. And we also have a guy, John Cornyn. John Cornyn's the guy who tweeted the Mussolini quote, right? Oh, God. So it's like, dude, run for the Senate. You're a conservative Democrat, but we would have done a handful of videos. I'm like, hey, look at Beto.
If he was running against Ted Cruz, oh, yeah, we would be doing...
No, if he was running against Cornyn.
Oh, Cornyn. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So, but no.
Take it. Learn to take yes for an answer.
Take yes for an answer, but the siren calls and the delusion and the narcissism of running a presidential campaign.
I was just born to do it, like he said at the end of that Vanity Fair profile.
He's born to be in it.
Were you like born to poll at 6 and 7% and get wiped away by a mayor and a vice president with bad Botox? Because that's what it's looking like. So not turning out too well for Beto O'Rourke, and one of the core substantive raps against him, and it makes sense, he's from Texas, has been that, again, by Texas standards, decent environmental record, by what is absolutely scientifically necessary to do to convert catastrophe, not good. And by national Democratic standards, with leaders like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and Jay Inslee, not good the amount of money he's taken from the fossil fuel industry. He gets that, so here's his video.
Wanted to let you know that I've signed the No Fossil Fuel Money Pledge. And I've done it in large part because I was asked to by students that I met at William and Mary when I was in Virginia, students, young people, activists, and advocates that I've met all over the country who understand that we don't take PAC money, we don't accept help from corporations or lobbyists or special interests, but given the enormity of our challenge right now, to ensure that we keep this planet from warming 2 degrees over pre-industrial revolution levels because of the fires, the droughts, the floods, the cost in human life that will produce, and that we need everybody on board to meet this challenge head on. We don't want there to be any real or perceived conflicts of interest. So in accordance with the pledge, we returned any money we've received over $200 from any fossil fuel company executives. We will not take that money going forward. And we continue to try to be the largest grassroots campaign in this country. All human beings, all fellow Americans, all focused on the same goals, including confronting climate change before it is too late. So to those students, especially those at William and Mary, who spent the time to talk with us, to have the conversation, and with whom I spoke yesterday, thank you for your advocacy, for your leadership on this, and I look forward to working with you going forward.
Oh my God! Even with the serious video, the hands, he just can't stop. So
we could tell he's a little deflated because he's not standing on anything.
Right, he should be standing on that little desk in front of the couch. So, okay, the Sludge reports though that here is the problem. And I'm quoting now. The problem is, however, he's already accepted money from 2 oil and gas CEOs this year, as well as from a state lobbyist from Chevron. Sludge's review of the O'Rourke campaign's first quarter campaign finance report shows that the promising presidential candidate has already received the maximum primary election contribution of $2,800 from Antonio R. Sanchez III, president and CEO of the Houston-based Sanchez Energy and chairman of related company Sanchez Midstream Partners, and $2,800 from Antonio R. Sanchez Jr., CEO and chairman of the privately held Sanchez Oil and Gas Corporation. In total, O'Rourke's campaign has received $22,400 from 8 executives at 3 companies, all of whom gave the maximum allowed amount on March 2020. 9th. In addition, he received a $250 donation from Patrick Killen, a New Mexico state lobbyist for oil giant Chevron. Look up Chevron in Ecuador. This guy should have ran for Senate. It would be ridiculous, I think, it's not like our cup of tea, but I think, he's got some political chops and he doesn't seem like a terrible person, but this was not the time for an empty center-right candidate with oil contributions.
Is it inconceivable that he doesn't pivot to running for Senate in 2020?
That would be the best. Honestly,
if you hear this, Beto, do it now.
Yeah, honestly. And then we'll get back to the decent things you've said about Palestinians. We've talked about that he has done some decent conservation efforts. You can abort this mission.
But assuming he doesn't, it'll almost be worth it just to watch his face get sadder and sadder as he realizes this is not going to happen. And you know what? Depressed Beto can get it. I'm here for it.
Depressed Beto is just not as excited anymore.
By the way, Beto announced a...
he was Goth Beto, yeah.
A sort of... Well, it's not a Green New Deal. It's sort of a Green Deal light sort of thing.
Right.
Greg Carlock, who's a researcher for Data for is that Data for Progress? At Data Progress?
At Data Progress.
I can't tell.
It's like a pistachio deal.
Bylines, yeah. But anyway, he did a long thing here where it's sort of saying, he said Beto's plan is less specific and less ambitious than the Green New Deal. Or Beto lists specific sectoral investments, but does not list any sectoral targets, and basically calls it it's basically a neoliberal approach. You want to set new standards, and the one defense of this.
We've been doing all this for decades.
Well, that's the thing is and then I saw one defense of this saying this Beto sort of takes it as if we're not going to win the Senate, so you're going to need to do a lot of this through executive action. But you know what? Green New Deal, baby.
Yeah. Beto's really seems to be moving towards this John Muir aesthetic campaign, which I find very strange.
All right, so some guy, what happened in Union Square? This is a fun thing.
Indeed.
Sometimes things like this happen to now, who is this person that got egged? What is this actual story?
Jovi Val. He is a Nazi. He used to be
a self-identified Nazi.
He used to be in the Proud Boys. He used to be kind of alt-light, and then he went full fash. He's wearing a swastika in this video.
He's wearing a swastika. Okay, so he's self-identifying this way.
Yeah, and someone I know has met him and says he's an asshole.
Okay, and someone else that maybe a lot of us know in a certain sense met him at Union Square yesterday.
So what?
When people cover their faces, I think hey, they're probably...
Do you feel threatened?
Covering your face.
Maybe you should go cover our faces and you might fuck up.
No, I just don't want anybody trying to... The guy threw coffee at...
Oh, shit! Ew!
Yes!
Oh, my God!
Yes!
Egg! He threw an egg at him! No, the bag! Yeah!
Someone's got his flag.
Someone's got his flag.
Holy shit!
Now, were those Whole Foods eggs or Farmers Market's eggs?
Oh, I mean, I like
know.
how nonchalant he looked right before he did it, too. Dooper dude, just carrying home a groceries from Whole Foods. And if you look closely, there are actually 3 eggs in his hand.
Yeah, he triple-egged him.
That's some really good backhanding.
I think the eggs are a good middle ground for people who were, maybe a bit squeamish about, say, Richard Spencer getting punched. But I think if you are walking around Union Square, saying Nazi stuff wearing swastika, I don't know, bolo tie. I don't know what that was. Then guess what? You can expect an egg, buddy.
Yeah.
It's perfect because an egg doesn't really hurt you. So you're not going to get sympathy from anyone, not even, the liberals who are all ooh, Antifa has gone too far. No, you just look ridiculous and everybody laughs at you. It's wonderful.
We have a shot of the triple egg. Brandon,
oh,
if
wow.
you want to put that up there.
Spiral.
That's some video games.
That's actually beautiful with the clock, the sort of mosaic in the background. That's very poetic.
And I may or may not know the guy who threw the egg, but if I do, I'm very impressed with him because he seemed like more of an armchair communist and less like he had that kind of stuff in him. So if he can do it, so can you.
Actually, Jared Holt of
you want.
Right Wing Watch has an article on our friend Joe Vival here. Fallen MAGA hero Joe Vival goes 1488. That was in on March 4th, 2019. So yeah, apparently recently he's had all of his social media accounts, like in the past few days, has had his social media accounts taken off too for being a Nazi. So bad week for a Nazi. So it's just good week for everybody else.
Yeah, and it also shows once more how the quote unquote alt-light or whatever is a feeder to harder forms of white nationalism and fascism.
Word. You're calling from a 520 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hello?
Hello.
Is this me?
Yeah, this is you. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Oh, sorry.
No worries.
My name's Joel. I'm calling from Arizona.
Hey, Joel. What's on your mind?
Hi. I wanted to talk about debate. There's just sort of, I don't mean like academic debate where people write papers back and forth. I'm just talking about the idea of sort of the concept of live debate and how much value it has.
Okay.
So I was recently watching a debate between Peter Hitchens and Ben Judah.
Okay.
Everyone has a pundit who they just hate more than anyone else. For you, it's probably Dave Rubin.
No, I don't hate Dave Rubin at all. Dave Rubin brings me a lot of joy.
Well, I guess personally, sorry, never mind.
No worries. But anyway, so who do you? Yes. So you tell us who you hate, but then let's try to make it into a question. All right, brother.
Okay, sorry.
No worries.
So, I was wondering how much value do you think live debate has? Because I was watching a debate, and I was listening to Peter Hitchens make a point, which the core concept of it was basically that if an empire loses territory, it can't be expansionist, and you don't have to worry about that empire.
Okay, well, that's a pretty dumb point. If you're representing that correctly, that's a very dumb thing to say. In fact, I've always thought Peter Hitchens was a reactionary, but a lot more clever than that. So it sounds weird.
Yeah.
Yep.
The gist of it was that since the Russian Empire lost a huge amount of territory after the Soviet Union collapsed.
Well, let's not get into that. Just so your question is, do you think live debates are valuable? And I think that live debates. I think. Because as an example, I think Zizek, I have watched more of that debate. I think he did a great job with Peterson, even actually down to the fact that he was polite and didn't go in for the kill. I think that actually was very smart, very well played. So I kind of am, I think it's like anything else. I mean, sometimes yes, sometimes no. I mean, I don't have a particularly strong feeling about it one way or another, but it does seem that it actually can still shine a light in a good way at times.
Yeah,
I appreciate the call. Thanks, man.
I'm a reformist when it comes to live debates and not an abolitionist. I think, first of all, the crowd there shouldn't be a live crowd to feed into anything people say, because then it just turns into a demagoguery affair.
Right.
There should be a moderator, the people involved in the debate, and then no one else.
Right, I agree.
And that's how the presidential debates should be too. There should not be crowds at presidential debates at all. I honestly it would have been amazing to see Trump debate without a crowd in the 2016 primary.
Oh, he would have looked terrible.
Exactly. So I think that from that perspective, there's non-logical stuff like that creeping into these live debates, and it's mainly about rhetorical performance. On the other hand, I like a lot of these
and
debates.
Even without that, they are about rhetorical performance. I just also think you got to go in knowing what it is, and unless it's and I actually think I have to say I think one of the reasons that people also kind of enjoyed the Zizek Peterson thing was because it, in a weird way, it was even though it was this prime for what that is, quote unquote, entertainment event, it was actually kind of mutually respectful in a way that actually sort of played well. And I think even again, I I think the fact that he couldn't pivot, like Michael Eric Dyson, in my view, it just wasn't like, it just was like, okay, Michael Eric Dyson made some lines that are satisfying to, our side to some extent, but Peterson could just go like a mind meld into that. And with this case, it was just literally like super politely and super friendly, but like, seriously, dude, you read the Communist Manifesto? Like, you read like a pamphlet in preparation to debate like a world system philosophy? Like, if I read like a Young op-ed from 1945 and came to you and said, I'm ready to talk about Young, you would be like, what are you talking about?
You're supposed to be an expert on Marxist totalitarianism, and it's the first time you picked up one of his easiest to read publications.
Dude, I'm not even convinced
that he read it.
Yeah. And also assigned to like 10th graders.
Right.
That is not.
Yeah, I read that in high school.
Yeah, that's
political
not philosophy
science class.
and economics. That's literally like, that's a campaign manifesto.
And he didn't research any of the sort of like details around the publication or production of the manifesto. Like he's a charlatan. There is no question about that. Like the idea that he wrote the Gulag Archipelago. I mean, he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Stuff. I think he believes in this stuff,
but he doesn't have
no idea what he's talking about.
I mean, I think you can be a good faith charlatan. Like but I think his level of expertise for someone who wrote the Gulag Archipelago introduction for Penguin Classics, it's a joke, and it's going to be a funnier one as it becomes more evident to people.
And if you look, like, I've waded a little bit into the Lobster Boy subreddit, and some of these Lobster Boys recognize that their daddy got owned, and now they're taking a second look at him.
Who's your daddy?
Taking a first look
I can't do a Zizek.
Their new daddy, Slavoj Zizek. And, like, I don't agree with everything that Zizek has said. I do think sometimes he says things just to get a rise out of people, and he speaks in these weird dialectics. So if you take one clip of him, it sounds a lot worse than it actually is. But he has said some really shitty things about trans people and immigrants. But, like, I understand that this debate was not necessarily for me. And if he can get Jordan Peterson's fans to abandon him, that's at least one step towards my kind of politics, and maybe I can scoop them up after that.
Yeah, and I'm a Zizek. I just want to, the only thing I will say about Zizek, I don't want to open up this whole debate, but I do think it's like important to note that, and I guess where my basic dividing line is like, nothing he's ever written or said actually implicates the rights or the protections of anybody. And that's my bottom line. Like, that's, so, and his critiques and things he's pointing to, again, Zizek is somebody that you do literally need to put him in context. Like, this is not Sam Harris. This is somebody who really actually does require highly attentive reading. And yeah, he's written some dumb political op-eds, but he's brilliant.
All that stuff aside, to Jamie's point about the people in the Lobster Reddit, that goes back to what we're talking about with Ben Burgis and the whole give them an argument sort of thing. Because we can sit here and say, you bought into Jordan Peterson, well, you're a hopeless case, get the fuck out of here. And that's true for a lot of those people. But there's also a huge, like, hundreds of thousands of those people who are just neophytes and 100%. Are dipping their toes into sort of politics for the first time in their 20s or something
and actually,
like that.
Again, another word that's been destroyed, but like ideas.
Yeah.
And being interested in books and interested in thinking about the world, and that's a good thing, and it can be harnessed for great ideas in politics.
I could do with like fewer pot shots against the evil social justice warriors, but again, that's like probably the only reason Peterson agreed to talk with Zizek in the first place.
I will say this though about Zizek's.
I agreed with a fair amount of those critiques. Frankly,
this is what I'll say is because Zizek drew a distinction between that and Marxists, and frankly, I can appreciate that a little bit.
No, and they are distinct, and I think he also, again, actually, I think when this is actually something I'm using in my book, but I think the difference between recognizing that a lot of times that rhetoric is actually still assuming that you're like the universal subject who's bestowing, like, look at how enlightened I am, versus like actually going into like a genuine common global human effort that is not from a place of moralism and performativity, he was 100% right about. And I'd like to see a lot more of that, frankly. So I actually like that critique.
Well, I mean, sometimes it feels a bit straw man-y. Like the reason, I've said this before, the reason I disagree with social justice warriors, quote unquote, is not because they care too much about trans rights, it's not because they're shrill, it's because they are liberals without a materialist critique of things.
Nobody, and everybody's on the same page in terms of rights.
I have an interesting headline from the Washington Post. This comes from the Washington Post writing a good headline. See if you'll see what I'm noting
That's
here.
shocking.
Facebook bans far-right leaders, including Louis Farrakhan, Alex Jones, Milo Yiannopoulos, for being dangerous. So the Washington Post agreed that Farrakhan is a right-wing figure.
Well done. Well done being able to disaggregate there, though I will be signing a protest letter to get him back on Facebook. That's a travesty. It's one of my heroes right there. It's my right-wing bunker mate, as we said in the LA Live show. You're calling from a 360 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hi, my name is Dan from Seattle.
Hey, Dan, what's going on? What's on your mind?
So I wanted to talk a little bit about like logic and how it's used.
Okay.
And maybe I have an idea of how morality is constructed, and maybe you guys can shoot it down. So logic is sort of like an analog for causality, and it's an abstraction that we use to solve problems.
Mm-hmm.
So it's useful in that regard.
Okay.
And then the way that we construct morality in communities, right? So we sort of like try to make accurate predictions about how our environment's going to behave, but we can't do that with people because people have free will. So we sort of like aggregate into these communities where we can predict the behavior of other people, and then those are our moral communities, right?
Okay. Sounds good so far. I don't really object to this. Sure.
I guess I was just kind of curious if like that like model is like a logical construction, or if that's completely off base, like from your guys' opinion.
I don't know. What do you guys think? Thanks so much for the call, man. Appreciate it. Do you guys have any thoughts on whether that works or not?
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, I'm sorry. I call back. Sorry. Actually, but call back, honestly, even though we didn't handle that well, call back when I'm here. Because I don't think that that's a Sam call.
I'm not
I need to take a bong rip.
Yeah,
genius.
Slick.
Bong rip time.
Bong rip time. Do we still have that Alon? All right, I want to do a few more. I just want to play that Alon Elmar sound. Do we still have that? That's still on the list. I do. I want to play that. Do we still have it?
Yeah.
All right, let me read a few. Jay Cool. Didn't Meghan McCain's brothers serve to spread democracy around the world? I don't understand.
Not that kind of democracy. He means capitalist democracies.
Colin from Nebraska, fuck Warren Buffett. Sure. I don't know what the specific context is, but I'd buy it.
There are no good billionaires.
Ian from London. So glad I finally got on the show. I ended up chatting 10 minutes about working under my Venezuelan manager at work before I realized you hadn't interrupted me and I was cut off. Something to share next time. Left is best. Oh, I'm sorry about that, man. Classist Creative. I know we're very concerned about the Democratic primary, but can we start talking about the possible tactics for the all too great possibility of Trump invalidating and undermining the elections if he loses?
We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, buddy.
Yeah, I mean, that's not the primary concern.
I mean, what can we do?
Look, I will say this. Again, maybe I'm too cynical about things like Bill Barr or Bob Barr just being like, of course a propagandist and lawyer, in terms of the president, and of course the executive branch being out of control, and of course the system being totally corrupt. I think if Donald Trump loses the presidency, I find it exceedingly hard to believe that the armed forces and Secret Service will surround him and keep him in the White House.
Yeah, it's not just about the individual, motivation and criminality.
I would be terrified now.
There's literally people should be a bit more scientific about what the deep state or even the state is and how it would react to something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The system has proven to be remarkably stable over time, unfortunately, for people who want to change it.
There's circuit breakers here. Okay, Ilhan Omar. We stand with Ilhan Omar every day. We've obviously played these recent disgusting clips of Ben Shapiro and Meghan McCain to
relentlessly disgusting people continuing to lie and smear and incite against her. I would use the word incitement. Here she is at a rally in Washington, D.C., correctly identifying the hate and extremism emanating from Trump's White House and how it harms both the Jewish and Muslim communities.
When they shove that to us and say we're the party of hate, they forget that we're the party of love. We're the party of compassion. We're the party of inclusiveness. What we are fighting for is not for the few, but for the many.
Yes.
Every single one, just this week, when we've had the attack in California on a synagogue, it's the same person who's accused of attempting to bomb a mosque. So I can't ever speak of Islamophobia and fight for Muslims if I am not willing to fight against anti-Semitism. We collectively must make sure that we are dismantling all systems of oppression.
And this is a person, of course, who has never been and never said anything other than she fights anti-Semitism. She's criticized the nation state of Israel, which in addition to objectively being enormously abusive and harmful to Palestinians, is a nation state and not a people, and certainly not an essence of a people.
Queen.
Favorite member of Congress, hands down.
Hell yeah.
I want to say, okay, I do want to speak to this. For a year, Lula da Silva has been silenced in Brazil. I'll keep reiterating the reason I cover this. The reason I cover this is because I agree with Noam Chomsky. He's the most prominent political prisoner in the world. It's also that you can't understand this broader reversal in Latin America that's happened going back to a coup in Honduras in 2009, which was backed by Hillary Clinton's State Department and the Obama administration, and not understand this broader reversal of fortunes in Argentina and elsewhere. Bolivia's holding on. Evo Morales has actually delivered huge economic and social advancements for the people of Bolivia, while of course not being perfect, as no one is. In Ecuador, Lenin Moreno has totally betrayed that government, running on the party of Rafael Correa, but governing to the hard right. Lula, again, the pink tide as a whole brought 70 million people out of poverty. 40 million of those people were in Brazil under Lula's presidency, where he also used unclaimed land, brought farmers on land, passed wage, labor, and environmental protection laws, and also set, in some ways echoing like the non-aligned movement, a genuine independent trajectory in Brazilian foreign policy, which even in some ways his ideas about how to deal with the United States and Iran will get manifested years later in the Obama-Iran deal. This is a powerful leader, an incredible, an exceptional leader who led in all the polls and was silenced and put in jail with, again, zero, literally the sentence is read, indeterminate acts, by the same prosecutor/judge. Yes, he served. Judge Sergio Moro was served in both positions because of a rule in Brazil that has not been changed since the Inquisition. So he was both the prosecutor and the judge, and now is the justice minister in Jair Bolsonaro's fascist and almost certainly connected with the paramilitaries that assassinated Marielle Franco's government. You cannot look again at all of these policy systems, including this attempt at potentially an invasion in Venezuela, without understanding what has happened to Lula in Brazil. He's been silenced. He's been held in solitary confinement, not allowed to give press interviews. This is a place where politicians facing serious corruption charges, with actual evidence, are out on bail, don't have trials for years, where people who've been convicted of trafficking and mass murder are given television interviews. He was given his first interview publicly over a week ago, and of course impressed everybody by how in command he is of the political situation, how articulate he is about what's happening, and also like he's undaunted. And his wife, brother, and grandson have died within a year. It's stunning. We've talked about within the last 2 years. We'll talk about it. We talked about it more with Anna on TMBS, but I just want to briefly from a great report that Brian Mayer put together in the Brazil Wire. Lula said, "I'll stay behind bars for 100 years before I trade my dignity for freedom." And then Mir goes on to say, it's illegal to deny prisoners the freedom of expression to speak with members of the press in Brazil. This, however, did not stop former judge and current Justice Minister Sergio Moro from barring Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva from giving interviews for over 1 year. The case, which rose to the Supreme Court after a ruling forcing the Curitiba Federal Police headquarters, where the former president has been illegally held in solitary confinement in violation of the Mandela rules since April 7th, 2018, to allow the former president to give one 2-hour interview to 2 Brazilian journalists. It took 6 months to implement, as Moro's Curitiba cronies did everything they could to block the process. And Lula said, amongst many other things, Brazil is now governed by a group of lunatics. The elites have to engage in a process in self-criticism onto how Bolsonaro became president. I will stay behind bars for 100 years before I trade my dignity for freedom. He also spoke of how the judge turned Justice Minister Sergio Moro and his Lava Jato task force, which had just been blocked from receiving a $2.5 million gift of confiscated Petrobras money that was initially earmarked for public education and health systems from the U.S. State Department. And, you know, again, he talked about the social programs of the Workers' Party. He talked about why Bolsonaro would salute a U.S. flag and the sort of imperial subserviency of Brazil under Bolsonaro. Ask any Democrat you see running for any office what they're going to do about the attack on rights in Latin America and Brazil, and specifically to free Lula. It's incredibly important. All right, final call of the day. Yeah, go ahead.
Stephen Morris pulled out.
Goodbye, Stephen Moore.
So Herman Cain, baby. Let's get the Cain train on the Fed.
Let's get the Cain train. Let's do it. Whoop. Final call of the day. You're calling from a 405 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, I'm Gregory from Oklahoma.
Gregory from Oklahoma. How are you?
I'm all right.
Okay.
Just getting ready for school to be wrapped up for the semester.
Congratulations.
Yep. But yeah, next week's the last week. I think y'all read my IM earlier this week. I lost my job.
Sorry
for some
about
reason.
that.
I'm not sure exactly how.
Sorry.
Yeah. See here. But yeah, so I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do about that. And I've been watching the show and keeping up with what y'all are doing. And y'all are doing good stuff.
Thank you, Gregory.
That's pretty much all I can say.
Thank you.
All right. Well, good luck, brother.
We need
Hang
some
in
more.
there.
We need some more Oklahoma listeners, Gregory.
Yeah, we do. Gregory, good luck. Congratulations on finishing the semester. I'm going to read 2 AMs, and then we are going to be done. Let's see. Winnipeg Greg, left-wing Bush seems like the kind of guy you could have a beer and seize the means of production with. Yeah, exactly. Congressional baseball fan. Recently, a trailer was released for the Sonic the Hedgehog movie, and there's, of course, the usual fan controversy back and forth. But what no one was talking about, the true controversy surrounding Sonic, the look of the character was based on the Michael Jackson cover of Bad, while his personality was based on the 1992 presidential candidate Bill Clinton's Get It Done attitude. Sonic's nemesis, Dr. Robot... I could not have less of an idea what any of this means. Sonic's nemesis, Dr. Robotnik, was inspired by Teddy Roosevelt. I hope this brings a whole new dimension to everyone's relationship to Sonic
because
the
of the
Hedgehog.
mustache? I think,
Sonic is canceled.
I think
I have no
I think
idea what any
CBF
of
is
this
telling
means.
some tall tales here.
Tail,
you get it.
Was my birthday...
Oh, man.
Was my crazy liberal, was my birthday on Monday. This is Tim from Somerville. Left is best.
Hello.
I can't find the show far.
Happy birthday,
Here in America.
Hashtag me too. Sorry, I'm just going off over here.
Yes, you are. And the final I am of the day. Apologize, can I get to all IMs?
I have to say that my brain is still in recovery mode from taking in so many high-level important ideas.
One more time.
I have to say that my brain is still in recovery mode from taking in so many high-level important ideas.
Same.
Rob from Austin, Texas. New character, Juan Bro Guaido. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of what it is. Hey guys, Periscope here, trying for another coup. Gonna wait for some more people to arrive in the live stream. Could super use some U.S. Air Force support. Would be totally rad. WTF was Beto doing sitting on a step with a perfectly good table behind him?
Not good. Believe me, not good.
Exactly.
He's not well.
He's not well. He's sad. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better.